Meeting back to order. And with that, we'll begin the workshop. And I apologize to all of those who are diligently working who don't have lunch. Some of us placed a lunch order so that we could work through the lunch hour. So I hate to have to eat in front of you, but I will. And food is a very important part of my life. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank and properly introduce Assemblywoman Galgiani for her attendance here at the workshop. She is very concerned and excited about a high-speed rail in California and has been a very strong leader and advocate on our behalf. I believe is the author of AB 3034. Which was critical to ensure that the bond was in the very best position possible. And in fact, that legislation was the main reason, in my opinion, the bond passed, as it ensured economic feasibility and fiscal responsibility within the bond. It addressed the ability for us as an authority to expend the resources to ensure the project could be built in the proper fashion. And I want to thank her for her efforts and thank her for being here today, and would welcome a word if you wish. The trick is you have to hold that button while you talk, so it limits us from talking too long.
Well, I'm just really excited about all of the progress that we made, and when I learned that we had $16 billion worth of projects that actually met the criteria for the $8 billion that's available at the federal level, that just goes to show how well the authority has worked and planned, and it's really a tribute to all of your efforts and the work that you've done long before I came into the picture. And I just want to also thank everybody with the authority and Judge Kopp and others who were so helpful to me with the bill. It was my second year in the legislature, and it was a big undertaking, and I had a lot of great help. And if it weren't for all of the help that I did have from Meddy and Steve and Carrie and Judge Kopp, we would have not been able to get the bill through. So thank you very much. I'm really excited about hearing the status today and where you're at, and look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to begin the workshop and ask Mr. Morshed to introduce the workshop to us and present those who will be sharing it through the course of the afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we discussed it earlier, part of your desire to have the board member well briefed in various aspects of the high-speed rail project and things we need to do in order to accomplish the task. And so we've arranged a series of 3 workshops, this one being on the project implementation itself, to be followed by one on finance and the other one on organization later. The objective here is to give you a briefing and it's going to take some time to an understanding of all the different kind of activities that need to go into building the project, and how the issue of phasing, how the issue of different sections, and all of those have to be addressed. And in this context, you're going to hear a number of description, a lot of phasing, segments, others. And keep in mind that this presentation today is based on an assumption, which is not necessarily the case, but one what we have to make in order to proceed. And the assumption is that we're going to build a high-speed rail as quickly as we can, and that the money we need to do to build it will be available when we need it. Now, in real life, that doesn't happen. We all know that. But you have to start somewhere, and that's a place to start. And then the following time, when we talk about the issue of financing and money, and then the organization later on, the outcome of that information will become part of a long-range, a 5-year and a 10-year type of a program, where we identify the priorities of how we're going to proceed with different segments and how we're going to finance it and so forth. And the Ms. Shank earlier talked about the a 3-year budget. We actually would recommend that we go with the 5-year program, which describes over the next 5 years what we plan to do and develop our annual budget from that. But this is the beginning of that process, and I'd like to have Kent Riffey started, and then Tony Daniels will follow. We'll give you a good briefing and description of what it takes. Obviously, you're welcome to, this is a workshop, so you're welcome to interrupt them and ask them questions and learn as much as you can, and you need to. The audience as well, obviously, this is a workshop, and we would like to know what the audience and other public's opinions are, and at the end of that presentation, there will be an opportunity to hear from the public. With that, I'll turn it over to Kent Riffey, our Chief Engineer, to get started. Kent?
Okay. Thank you. If we could have the first slide. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the authority. My colleague and I, Tony Daniels, will be conducting the workshop this afternoon. And it really is an outgrowth of the July board in which we outlined a process by which we would be developing collectively a project programming plan. The objectives for today's workshop is really the first step in developing of this plan. Today we will discuss what it will take to move Phase 1 out to revenue service. It will include an update on program status and major elements to revenue service and the interrelationships of those steps going forward. The format will be Tony and I will make some presentation here, some slides on various topics, and we certainly invite members' questions, comments, suggestions, opinions as we go along. Taking a look then at the agenda, we'll begin by looking at some of the key roles in the implementation of the project. The role of each member of the team is critical to the program's success, and Tony will speak to the principal areas of responsibilities of the team and how they interact. We'll then look at the current program status, where we are today, covering the areas of the outreach program, the environmental process as it stands, and the development of engineering as it rests today. A very important part, key part of the workshop deals with the next steps to revenue service. A very intensive and involved effort which we will outline for you today. As part of that, we will be talking about the staging of the work right away, the various aspects about the procurement packages, construction, and of course test and commissioning. And very importantly, there will also be an example in the initial section that deals with Los Angeles to Anaheim, and Tony will talk to the staging and the construction in that section. They will wrap up with, at the end of the session, with a summary of what we've been able to accomplish today and talk about the objectives for the following workshop. And are there any questions about the agenda?
I have one. It's not a question, but upon completion of this workshop, I would like to recommend that this whole presentation be available on our website, and all members of the authority board receive it emailed to them so we can review it again if that's possible.
It will be done, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tony Daniel.
Let's see now. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thanks, Kent. Let's see if this works. And it does. What I want to talk about, first of all, is the roles of the teams that are on board. It's in a broad outline before we get into the responsibilities of the teams. Now, clearly, the start process is with the authority board and staff, and it's self-explanatory that they set out the policy, the direction. They handle and deal with the key issues and the finance, and through Mr. Morshed, we on the PM team take that direction and work with it. Our job is to manage the overall program, and you'll see as we go, it takes us from the start of the environmental process to the 30% design, to the rod and nod, to the procurement process, to the building of the line, the testing, commissioning, and to revenue service. The project team itself has been focused on, in the last 2 years, of course, the first piece, the priority piece of getting to the rod and nod and the 30% design. And our focus in that time scale is to produce the standards, to look at the consistency so the whole process is safe. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is what was that, because it's a major piece of the work that we've been carrying out in the last 2 years. The program is being set down for phase 1 into these phases, these sections, to go through the environmental process. And I will talk later, when we get to that, as to who is doing it and where we are with it and what percentage of the work was being completed in it. But this is the phase 1 section of the work. And some of the board members are well versed in what that is and where the limits are. We're also looking, of course, at the full system, bringing in the Sacramento to Merced, the San Diego to Los Angeles, and the Altamont. These are also being looked at, and we will go through where we are in terms of the staging, in terms of the positions on the work associated with that. And finally, as I said earlier, we will manage through construction and service startup, and we'll do that through build and supply contractors and manufacturers, because our aim is to go out on design, build, and P3 for virtually all the work. So what is our responsibilities? And I'm going to cover each one of these, and I'm doing so because the basic parameters of the system need to be laid out in this fashion to allow the end product, and that is the management of construction to revenue service, to make sense. Let's see if it works. Yeah, it does. And what I would like to say is that this part is really where we've been concentrating. It's like corralling cats. We've got our hands around these cats. Now, there's some bumps in the road, Mr. Chairman, I understand that. Well, we're nearly at cattle, nearly at cattle. And I want to talk about that a little bit further. Okay, on the outreach,
yes, most of the time I was speaker, I was spent corralling one cat.
Being chased by them. Well, it's a good comment, because a member of our team made that remark and did a really good video on it. And it is like corralling cats. You know, it's a very difficult thing to do, and it's taken a couple of years to get those cats somewhere in the same cage, not in the same state. So on the outreach, our responsibilities, I'm not going to read all these out, by the way, because they're self-explanatory. And what I would say is, as I go through these responsibilities, I'm going to follow up with where we are in these responsibilities. So rather than answer the question now, how far have we gone with this, I want to go through the responsibilities and tell you where we are with those and where we are with the overall work. And I think the board members themselves have been hugely involved with this outreach program. And when we get to what we have done and where we are, then I'd like to recognize some people who've dealt with that.
Watch your laser.
Watch my laser, yeah. Hey, this is good. Whoa. Oh, I'm doing the wrong one. Yeah, but they look the same. Yeah. So let me talk really about where we are and switch this off for a minute. The main thing here is to develop high-speed rail standards to meet running trains at 220 miles an hour. And you'll hear me talk later on, there are no rules and regulations or standards for operating trains in this country above 150 miles an hour. There are none. And it's a massive task that we've undertaken, and the consultants in this country have tried for some 30 years or more since I've been here to establish these rules for bringing in high-speed trains from Europe and Asia. And that's been a major piece of the work and what we're doing, and we'll try and explain that as we move forward. What is important, though, I hope for the board to, and I know they understand, is that we are not inventing the wheel. There is no way that we're starting from scratch. We're taking the best standards that are out there in the world today from Europe and Asia and bringing those together. And I will talk about what that means and how we develop them as we move forward. So that's important, such that when we finish the exercise, it's not a demonstration project. It's real, and it's based on proven trains that have been safe for 40 years or more, traveling at these high speeds all over the world. The other part of this is to ensure that the whole thing does tie together, that there's the integration between the key vital elements of the core systems, and I'll talk about what those are later, and the infrastructure, so it will be safe. It does work together, and how we verify and validify the approach of the designs as we go through to building it, testing it, and commissioning it. And of course, our job on the whole process here is to ensure this is an old picture, but it is true. Our aim is to make sure those rails do meet, and that those people arguing are not arguing, and that's one of our aims. On the system level design side, because although, and you'll hear me talk about the regional consultants' work throughout, and what they are doing and how they're doing it, from a program management point of view, we have to set not only overall standards that apply to each of the segments so they do meet and tie together, but also it's important for us to lay down the system because the individual sections cannot do that. So our job is to look, first of all, what is the system design? What is the system performance and trip times? We've taken a number of high-speed trains throughout the world. We've taken the traction effort curves or the power requirements to drive these trains. We've taken the alignment profiles we've got to date and the station locations, and we've produced a performance, a trip time. Now, this looks kind of complicated, but it is not. And Brent, if I could ask you to move over a little bit, because I'm going to try and use what I've got here, if it works. There. Now, this is a trip time between L.A. and San Francisco. And at the bottom here, you can see the profile and this wonderful climb up here, or down gradient, 3,600 feet. No mean feet to run a train on this section. And then take it through across the Pacheco into Gilroy and San Jose and into San Francisco. The thing to note is that these train performance times are real times. They're not taken by some calculations. They've been taken by, in this particular one, is an AGV, a French AGV, one of the more latest trains that are out there, that's capable of and has been designed for 360 kph is what we're operating at. It also shows from the profile here what's the maximum speed that we can travel at and what speeds we will be operating at to achieve the running time between LA and San Francisco. This line here shows the power that we'll be using. How do you drive this train to operate at these speeds? And the thing to remember is this red block here is regeneration power, because as you come down here, the train set itself will regenerate, and it'll push juice back into the overhead, which we can use again. And that's an important feature of looking at the overall system. And so this tool became very important for us to move to the next section, which is the timetable. But before I do that, is there any questions at all on this particular approach, on this graph? I'm taking...
I'd like to know the speed going through...
I'm sorry, sir, I can't hear.
Speed going through Morgan Hill seems to be quite
I don't know. Looking at it from this, I can't tell.
Thank you. How about, though, if I want to make sure anybody who does have any questions, if there are, Mr. Moorshed somehow decided how we were going to run the workshop, and how we're going to run the workshop will be through the course of the presentations we'll hear, but there will be times along the way we should stop and make sure anyone from the public who wishes to be heard, probably at the microphone there would be the best place to do it.
Okay.
If anyone has any of those concerns. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Kett.
I think that's a good suggestion, and I think all along the same lines, if somebody's got a question that we can't answer now, let's make sure somebody gets back to the gentleman with the answer to that question.
So if there are folks other than members of the authority who wish to ask questions, I'll ask for them to state their name and provide us information so we can follow up with them and get them the answer necessary. Okay, thank you.
And so we...
Chairman, on that question,
yes,
though,
Mr. Dearman.
I think we have to stress that these are demonstration diagrams for our own experience. They're not proposed speed limits or operational characteristics, because we haven't done the studies to determine how we're going to operate the trains yet. So they're just demonstrations to try to give us some background. The point is that I wouldn't want someone to say, oh, it's going to go 200 miles an hour through Morgan Hill. Well, that's not the case. We want to make sure that everybody knows that these are examples. They're not actual situations. They're not proposed situations.
I'd like to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels.
It's against the best information we have. The traction motor curves are real. The alignment is the best alignment we have to date. We will continue to evaluate those, you're correct, as we move forward. But we've used this, and you'll see in the next couple of slides, the basis upon which we've drawn up a very detailed timetable, an operational plan, and from which we've got the ridership.
Okay. We understand that this is a maximum speed defined by physical conditions, but not an operational plan. You're just suggesting that this is what things to consider in terms of what could physically occur, but it's not the operational plan of the system. Got it.
It's likely to be. It's close. You'll see when we go to the timetable and then the operational plan. I know you're going to laugh at this one, but I'm going to go back, is that it is close.
Please just proceed with your presentation as you have prepared it. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go back one. Well, it's from the trip times that we then look at how fast we can go, where we can stop, what is likely against the alignment. And we've put together a full operating plan for the system. This operating plan is in draft form, will change as we finalize the alignment and finalize the speeds. But it's a fairly detailed one and will allow us to work through a full operational plan. And what I mean by that is that can, in fact, we run these trains? And what is typical to most people in the room, the string line diagrams, which show north and south. This is just a piece of it, which indicates that at the speeds we're talking about, over the alignments that we've laid down, that to the timetable that we have, that the trains, in fact, can run without getting fouled up between themselves at any portion of the route. It's from that we have worked with the ridership forecast. We've taken these timetables. We've done a number of them. We've run a series of alternative operations. We've looked at alternative station sites, and this is our responsibility, and we will have some results later. We've looked at the sensitivity between the fares and auto costs. We've related that to 2035 for the Phase 1 full system. And we've established the daily peak loads and peak load factors at stations and boardings. Now, this is something that we will continue to work on. I think Mr. Moorshed said earlier that we are going after further ridership studies, and we will be doing additional simulations on trains, on timetables, and to ensure that we can meet the performance. But this has been taken a fairly long way, because this is the basis upon which ultimately we are currently designing the full alignment, the track work, and which the environmental document will be based on. It's from this approach that our responsibility then moves to, okay, what is the train set technology? How many train sets do we need to order to meet the ridership figures against the timetable, against the speed of the train? And later on I'll say where we are with that and what are we doing. It's our job also to come and decide system-wide for the full 800 route miles, what is the electrification power that's required? What is the high voltage utility transmission lines that are needed, and where? Where do we put the supply stations? Where do we put the switching and paralleling stations? And what do we do about the overhead contact to give consistency throughout the 800 route miles? And I'll talk about that when we say where we are with that. Our other system-wide responsibility is in the train control and signaling. We certainly are going for a positive train control system which will operate the communications part of it through a fiber optic network, and will allow us to bring that all together in a central control and power supply center.
Yes, Mr. Daniel, excuse me, Mr. Katz.
Talk about positive train control for a couple seconds. For better or for worse, I've had to learn a lot about it relatively quickly in Los Angeles, as you understand. And I'm concerned because we get a lot of different timelines from the railroads in terms of when PTC is actually going to be available. We do have a commitment from UP and BSNF to start as early as 2012 in Los Angeles, at least with the track side implementation and those locomotives coming into town. What is our level of confidence in terms of being able to put this on our system in a time frame that matches our development time frame?
Yeah, good question. And I'm very sad to see what happened in your area. It was a tragedy for anybody in the railroads. Our plan, as you will see as unfold, and it's critical in our opinion, and though ultimately it will rest with the authority staff and board, to have what we call in the industry the core systems elements to be one contract. When I say one contract, one consortium or a group of people. And I want to talk about what that means when we get to it. The reason for that, or one of the reasons, is we will be putting together performance specifications for that core systems, which will include train sets and train control, in particular positive train control. And so we will be, having set those performances, we'll be looking for that core system group, which has the expertise to put this together in a detailed design, basically off the shelf in terms of bringing it together for high-speed rail, whether it's in France or Germany or Spain or Japan or whatever. And that's part and parcel of when we look at the staging, when that comes in. We will not be reinventing or inventing the wheel as it relates to bringing PTC into the USA. The ones you're talking about in Los Angeles are homegrown, basically. They're not. They're PTC schemes which have been worked on for the last, I think, 4 to 5 years. There are some trials that have been put together. I think you probably know about that in the Midwest and with Amtrak, and they're being applied as best people can throughout the United States on commuter lines and passenger lines and freight lines. What we are doing is bringing together a core systems group that has done that before on proven systems and is part and parcel of the procurement process and the staging as we move forward.
I guess my question is, do you foresee, do you think the timeline to develop PTC in this country is going to match our construction schedule, number one? Number two, does PTC operate in other parts of the world?
Yes. Yes, specifically, we will be taking the PTC systems that operate in France and Germany and Japan and Spain by the core system group. They'll take that design. It's already there. You don't have to start it. It's part of what we will bring in as proven. We talked earlier on about high-speed rail proven technology. This is part of it.
And just one side question, if, with the indulgence of the chair, if it's in effect in other parts of the world, why are we having so much trouble here getting the railroads to do PTC and the federal government?
I don't know.
So let's take that question to Metrolink, and we can worry about it.
I couldn't get an answer there, which is why I came here.
Well,
But to clarify that point very specifically, does every high-speed rail system in the world use some form of positive train control?
Yes.
Therefore, whatever system and train set may eventually be selected, there will be something in operation for that train set in that country in which it presently is operating.
Yeah.
So from there can be a determination as to what needs to be augmented or complemented to ensure that's the highest level that we can provide on our system. Is that right?
Yes.
Very good.
And I will try and show that a little bit later on.
Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, we're just to recap a little bit. We came from train control to central control operations, and what I really want to show is, as an example now, is the effect. This is a schematic mimic diagram that's in many places, not only in the USA but around the world, which shows the control of the trains. You will know from the system where every train on the route is, when it leaves, where it is in real time. And the whole approach of a central control room is to know throughout the 800 route miles where those trains are, what's happening to them, and how to control them. And that's the whole part of ensuring that you do get a safe, reliable, and beautiful operation of the high-speed rail system in California. And then we've come out with the maintenance plan. What is required for all these trains? What is required in terms of being able to maintain them, and not just the train sets, but the track equipment, the power supplies, the overhead, what's going to take place in the stations, and all the civil structures that go with it. And when we get to where we are today, I want to explain what that is, but it's our responsibility to ensure what that plan is, when it's going to take place, and where we hope to place it in agreement with everybody else in the state through the environmental and alternative analysis process. This perhaps is one of the most important things that the program management team is doing. I've said earlier, and you'll see that there are no trains that can operate over here. That's been a massive exercise, and I think the board should know that we've had total and absolute cooperation from the FRA. And I guess with the injection now of the stimulus money, there's even more pressure on from the president to work without a problem. I came here 30 years ago to build high-speed trains, having done it in Europe, and we have never been able to crack it. This time, we are close to doing so, and I think we will get there, and we will be able to come up with a rule of particular applicability that will apply to California and hopefully one day to other places in the state. The same thing applies with the PUC. In California, there are no rules which will allow us to operate with 25 kV, 25,000 kilovolts, or what we're using, what we call the plus and minus 25 kV. And the PUC is not an easy animal to deal with, I think, as most people know. And we've been in discussions with them over the last year or so. I think Bob Doty's here somewhere. And he's had a tiger by the tail trying to do the same thing on the commuter line between San Jose and San Francisco. And we've bounced off all the work that Bob and his team is doing. And I think collectively we're beginning to get our arms around another set of cats. Excuse me, Commissioner, I didn't mean you, no. All right. The other piece of this, the other piece of this is you can't do anything without getting the support, the help of all the railroad operators. We cannot put a rule together without being tied down to what Caltrain's doing. All the railroads, whether it's freight or passenger in the state. And we have made contacts with all these railroads. and we are collectively working through the challenges that are out there, and there are challenges. It all goes to the regulatory approvals that we need. That's our responsibility statewide. We also, perhaps as a management team, setting the environmental approval guidelines. So not only are the designs are tied down for consistency, but the approach by which the environmental documents are put together. And I see on my left here, I have one of the architects, Christine Sproul, that's been supporting this effort. Dan Levitt has done a magnificent job, frankly, and I wish he was here to congratulate him, because these documents are probably worth their weight in gold, and they should write a book, because that's the guideline by which I think the rest of the country can move on. They've done a great job, Christine. Great job.
Mr. Umberg did just suggest that you wished they were as cheap as gold.
I can't answer that one, I don't think. The thing to remember, though, I think, Mr. Chairman, is that unless we complete the rod and nod, and as far as I know, we cannot move forward on the construction. I will talk a little bit later about what we're trying to do to mitigate that, but ultimately, to move forward on construction on any one of the sections without getting the approval, the environmental process approved, with all the stakeholders, we would not be able to move forward. It's a critical piece of the work, and you'll see that as as I look to where we are today.
And if I may, Mr. Daniels, I just want to understand or hear it articulated. We have a program level EIR that's complete. And in each of these segments, we are working for a project-level EIR, and we are able to segment that EIR process into those individual segments, correct?
Yes.
And one segment's challenges does not, in a project-level EIR, deter what could, in fact, advance in another segment. Is that correct?
I think it is so, yes.
We made a selection of a segment, but is there the ability to have a sub-segment cleared independently, or because of our determination, each segment must be held complete through this next project-level EIR process?
We are looking at that. Where's Carrie Bowen? She's in the room somewhere.
There's an answer through the...
Where are you? Oh. Sure. Well, either of you two, because we are working on that right now.
I'll just say we'll address the question by saying, although we've issued a notice of preparation and a notice of intent for a section of a certain size, you're not precluded from analyzing a smaller portion of that and doing additional documentation, but we need to satisfy both CEQA and NEPA responsibilities in doing so, and those are the reviews that we're now undertaking.
So the a tad premature, but it does, as you're seeking to get the information. But even though we have originally established a segment as a certain distance, there may be an opportunity, as long as we fully comply with all of the environmental review on a subsection, we may in fact be able to consider approval of a subsection.
You may, but it does raise some legal issues that we need to address. We have, under NEPA, issues of independent utility and not pre-committing to other portions of the system in doing so. And because you are creating a system which must link all of its pieces to arrive at a whole, those are serious questions that we need to review.
Good, thank you.
Is that the
Mr. Dearden?
Mr. Chairman, is that the piecemealing issue that is declared to be inappropriate when you're doing an overall system, starting one small element?
The word piecemealing is used in a variety. This is not piecemealing.
It's not, no.
It's independent utility that you want to make sure you have, and then not what we would call pointing the gun at either of the other sides that you're building.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Right, let's see where we are. And we also manage the work of the regional teams, and I want to talk about that in a little minute or two. It's brotherhood and apple pie. Our job really is to drive the schedule, control the budget, and ensure the quality. We deal overall with the resource agencies to help them pull that together. We, as I talked about earlier, need to provide the consistency not only for the environmental documents, the public outreach, and the system integration, but they are submitted on time and where we go. And these were the first ones some time ago in the Los Angeles corridor that we finally got some design documents that we could look at as the environmental work was going ahead. And that's the STV team with Kari Puvahidi and some guy with glasses on in the middle. And we were very proud of that moment, and we cheered and sang and danced, and then we got back to reality. And finally, in a sense, we get into the construction, overseeing the right-of-way and acquisition and permitting, the procurement process. This answers itself. We certainly need to put together the testing, commissioning, the programs associated with that so the contractors can work on it. And our job is to ensure that that is carried out and met, and we furnish. We manage the contractors and the core systems people such that ultimately, when we run these trains, it's safe, reliable for revenue service. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that verification and validation program is as we move forward. And coming to the regional consultants, what they are doing, they are applying all the standards we've been talking about and placing those segment or section by section. And I'm going to look, first of all, at phase one and then the remaining sections. And the teams that are doing it, led by HNTB in that first section from San Jose to San Francisco, from the Central Valley to San Jose, the Parsons Group. We have Sacramento to Fresno with the ACOM Group. Fresno to Palmdale with a joint venture of URS, Arup, and Hatch. From Los Angeles to Palmdale, it's the same joint venture but a reverse lead. In the Los Angeles corridor, it's been led by STV. And as we move on, we fit in the San Diego, Los Angeles group, headed up by HNTB. We're following the same pattern. And in the Altamont Pass by ACOM. And these are the regional teams that are putting the standards and environmental documents together on a site-specific basis. They are responsible for the production.
Excuse me, Tony, before you get into this chart, would you go back to the other one, even though it'll be different? Oh, no, there you go. I think it is... it's slightly confusing to me because this, in fact, doesn't... I'm trying to figure out in the Central Valley, the environmental work is being done in what segment?
Okay. These are the teams that contracted to do the work in the total section. We, I think, as you know, are only dealing with phase one at the moment.
Correct.
And therefore...
I get that. I just want to just get to the answer to the question, which you know I'm asking, which is these lines don't coincide necessarily with the sections in the first phase that we're working on.
Correct.
All right. So I just want to make sure the authority members know, particularly in the Central Valley, where or from Fresno to Palmdale, right now we're not looking at Palmdale to Bakersfield, correct? Or are we?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
The phase one will include, we've gone out with a separate NOI, NOP in advance, and I will put that together a little bit later to show you where that is and how. In the Central Valley, as we're not going under phase one from Merced to Sacramento, we took out an environmental NOI, NOP document between Merced and Bakersfield. We're also, though, carrying on at a later stage, because we needed that first for the test track, an environmental document from Bakersfield to Palmdale, and the NOI NOP for that goes out, I think, next week or the week after. And once that's in, we will have an NOI NOP and people working directly on all aspects of the environmental document from Anaheim all the way through to San Francisco for phase one. But the contract that I've shown up here allows those contractors to go beyond that to Sacramento, to Merced, to the San Diego, to LA for the NOI, NOPs are not there yet, and also for the Altamont corridor.
And NOI, NOP is what?
Notice of intent and notice of purpose.
Which is the
preparation.
Which is the it starts the...
It's the start the environmental process, yeah.
So, but specifically, our targeted 3 segments that we are looking at in phase 1, the one in the Central Valley does overlap 2 teams?
Yes.
And therefore, that's your job, is to coordinate those 2 teams?
Yes.
And therefore, there's one notice of intent that was filed for that segment, even though it does straddle those 2 teams?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see. What we're trying to say is that we're managing these 8 regional consultants, putting together the site-specific work, and when they have finished, they'll be responsible for the final environmental document, and also having the drawings, the 30% drawings, which we're calling camera ready to go out for construction, and what we would like to do to explain where we are with that, what it means, and how we're handling it. And Ken will be talking about the procurement process a little bit later on. So what is the current position, which is, I think, one of the things that most people are looking at. And I'm going to deal with each one of those as we go through it to tell you where we are today and obviously take any questions you have. The first one is on the outreach and communications. And let me say here that most of the board members have been heavily involved with this process, and I think Board Member Schenk, I remember a couple of years ago, really made a pointed note that nobody knew what the California High Speed, I don't know if she remembers that directly, I never forgot it, that who knows about high-speed rail? Is it maglev? And there was a lot of maglev in Southern California, and she rightly pointed out, what are we doing about it? And the communications team that we have, led by Chris Deutschman, wherever she is. Where are you, Chris?
Right there.
Oh, hi. She's done a magnificent job for us. I mean, truly. And I'd like to say that now because she's leaving the program management team at the end of this month, because that aspect of our contract is now being taken over by the authority directly, and rightly so. So, Chris, thanks a lot. Did a great job. You can't walk anywhere in California today without people knowing what the high-speed train is. You can't walk into a restaurant, maybe a bar, without people turning around and saying, hey, you're wearing this badge, they know about it. And that's a lot to do with the board members, the stakeholders, the regional consultants, and Chris Deutschman's team. Thanks, Chris. And this is what they've been doing. Now, I know there are bumps, and there always are going to be bumps. The board members will know better than I what that means as we try and build something of this size, something which is new, something that's never been achieved before and goes through everybody's backyard. But so far, the bumps have been handleable, I think. System design operations, we've established phase 1 and the full system.
Excuse me, Mr. Daniels. Mr. Katz.
If you go back one slide, please.
Yep.
I think that, I agree there's been a tremendous amount of outreach and a lot of meetings, et cetera. What I don't have a sense for is the result of any of those. I see the summary sheets we get every week or a couple of weeks, but I can't tell from that summary sheet if we were making a presentation or sitting in the back of the room. I can't tell if the folks were asked to endorse a high-speed train or they crapped on the high-speed train. So I agree that there's been a lot of energy, but I'm having a hard time judging what the detail is, what the result was, what was the end product of all of that. There's a lot of work that's gone in, it appears, and I just want to know what we got out of it.
I think it's a good point. Barker, are you around? Where are we?
Next I have to go through all 400 of the meetings right now, but
no, and that's all been Chris's domain. But starting this coming week, we'll be providing more detail on every meeting that we attend or call.
All right, but is there some way to figure out what happened to the last 400?
Chris?
Mrs. Deutschman.
We do have a record through the regional teams and then through our team of that. The version that you get doesn't have as an included. We've kind of done a snapshot of it, but there is backup for all of those meetings, and that's what Jeff and I are working on to kind of do the recap of that. So there's one point in time, and then as we move forward, provide you with the level of detail of outcomes issues.
At some point, I just like to, I mean, out of those 400 meetings, did we get 200 resolutions of support from city councils? Did we get 200 resolutions that said, don't come near my backyard? Just before the next group goes in, just what's the lay of the land?
Good, Mr. Deardon.
Mr. Chairman, this is one of the areas that has been a little confused on the peninsula. And I think it goes to the fact that Chris is working from the statewide level and has a team working from the state level. And then there's also an outreach organization that is run by the consultant working on that quarter. Mm-hmm. So you have two teams of outreach folks, and they don't always talk to each other. And they don't keep the board members informed, although Chris tries. That isn't universal. And because there's two teams, one being operated from the state level, the other being operated by the consulting organizations working on that section of the project, there's a tendency for the message to become confused now and then. That especially happened down in the Visalia area early on, and it has happened from time to time on the quarter, on the Peninsula Quarter. And that's one of the things as we go through a rebid on this that we need to address. Okay. Is it necessary to have two different teams, or should they be consolidated in one effort with maybe the governor's office pushing the buttons and choreographing that outreach so it's absolutely consistent?
I certainly understand your concerns, Mr. Deardon, as does our executive director, and that's why he sought to work to ensure that we had a deputy director focused on external affairs, and that's what we have in place now. The responsibility of now outreach being coordinated through the authority allows for that unifying of the message, allows for the coordination of activities to be done really through an authority entity. That doesn't mean we should overlook the importance of statewide outreach and communications and messaging. And it also doesn't suggest that statewide team somehow knows how to communicate messages in every single community in which we're going to be involved. I think your frustration and many others just has been the growing pains of getting up to speed and being able to unify the message, making sure everyone knows what's being said in a coordinated fashion, and to make sure that there's one person who's responsible for it all. And that is on the shoulders of not the governor's person, but in fact the authority's deputy director of external affairs communication, and Mr. Barker, as we have been able to pull him out of the governor's office, yes, but now he will work for the authority, and that will be the unifying individual who will focus that message and make sure we're coordinated. So I think we will be getting much better as this process moves forward.
Mr. Chairman,
may I ask, Mr. Barker, are you going to continue to have two different organizations, one statewide and one working for the engineers?
Mr. Deardon, we know that this is an issue of yours, and I've expressed to you that we're going to work on it, so don't put him on the spot 4 days after he's been hired and to tell you what full plan and reorganization he has. Let's give it a time to be able to put it together, okay?
Soon.
Thank you. Ms. Schenk.
Thank you. I agree with everything that has been said. I think this workshop is a good opportunity for us to sort of learn the lessons of the past, as you say, from the growing pains. And now we have a really good opportunity to move forward with those lessons, and I'm hoping that our Deputy Director for External Outreach will sort of call informally each member and see what our concerns are. The regions are different. What works in LA may not work in San Diego or in San Jose, so that we can, in a collaborative way, come up with the plan for the next phase.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Daniels.
Let's see. On the operations and ridership, we have established phase one and the full system detailed timetable. We've completed our ridership and revenue forecast for 2035. And let me say this, they will, it's a snapshot, if you like, in time, these figures, because we need them for the environmental side. I am absolutely sure that we will be doing more ridership forecasts. We'll be playing with the sensitivities and the timetables. It won't dramatically change what we've done so far, because we truly need to get the environmental document, the sizing of the stations, the track work, the number of train sets, and all the things that go with it tied down, else we're not going to make it. It also gives us the daily and hourly riders for the stations and the segments. And from this, we can look at the peak capacity, what we need in the train sets. It's from this that we know what our peak ridership is and how many train sets we need. We know that in the peak traffic area, we've got to put 2 of these trains together. And we know that we're going to operate somewhere between 900 and 1,000 people on those trains.
This is the only one who's picking up the signal.
Sorry?
Any of you guys have your phone on? Because that's signal.
We're doing a BlackBerry check. I think that whoever's mic is on, when their BlackBerry goes off, that's what the fuzz is. So if you happen to have one, just slide it aside, or a phone or something. You're the only one with the mic on.
No, you hear me?
No, we can hear you. We just hear the buzzing of the, if you have a phone or BlackBerry. Okay, don't worry about it.
No. Keep going. All right. Where are we? Yeah, 1,000 trains. Yeah. So what's required is putting these 2 200-meter train sets together to give us the peak ridership. We are looking at the vehicles that we want. We are working on a base of the technical specs for the interoperability standards, the TSIs, and we are meeting with the federal government on this aspect, and when we get to the regulatory process, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. We know we're going for 200-meter length trains. We know we're going for 220 miles per hour, or 354.2 kilometers per hour, whatever the difference is, and we know we're going to couple them together. We are going to use positive chain control. We are going to deal with, and I want to talk about what those core systems are when we get there. Under current review right now, we're looking at the number of train sets we need for phase 1 and the full system. We're looking at it against the background of the build-up. We don't need all the train sets on day 1, and that's part and parcel of our review. We're looking very hard at, and we'll be bringing to the board whether we want single-deck trains or double-deck trains, and it's not an easy decision. There are pros and cons for both, and we would expect over the next couple of months or so to bring those recommendations to Mr. Morshed and for you to have a real say in it, because they are critical to the design of the line, and there are options. We're also looking at the development of the train set specifications because of the long lead time, and we've started work on that. We've talked to a number of manufacturers from both Asia and Europe to get their views and ideas on the production schedule. And it's from this that we are working backwards to see when we need to put these specifications together and when we need to get out there, otherwise we're never going to make it. And they're real-time discussions. And when we talk in terms of getting to the construction side, we've had numerous discussions with major contractors to get their appetite for size and scale and resource. When we look at the maintenance facilities, we've established now a maintenance facility need which is based on open competition between Europe and Asia. That whatever we produce, they when they bid it, are capable of knowing what is required. We've issued what we call the technical memorandums and drawings for the 3 shops needed for phase 1. And that is the heavy maintenance facility, that is the periodic maintenance facilities and layover, and the other infrastructure maintenance facilities such as track laying, OSC testing and commissioning, and the necessary ballast trains that are required if you go ballast or otherwise. They're all part of looking at the maintenance facility layout, and they've been laid down.
Mr. Daniels, on this, could you tell me just, do you have further in your presentation, or is this the only time in which you mention maintenance facilities?
The only time, if any sense. Yeah.
Then just help me understand all of these things a little better. Established vehicle maintenance facility needs based upon European versus Asian systems. What are the differences there? Is it a level of service required, or is it more facilities available, or what are some of those distinctions?
Let me go back. We needed to understand that the train sets, let's say from Japan or Korea, would fit into the way that we were looking at the European system. For example, if you what's normally seen in the USA is if you want to do some maintenance on a vehicle, you just lift the locomotive at the front or lift the cars. On high-speed train sets, in particular in Europe, and this is a clean version of it, they lift the full 200-meter train in one go and bring out the trucks. And therefore, as we were looking at designing the maintenance facility to give us some kind of area, what we needed, and what facility should be in there. No, I'm not. I know. Is that what's making the noise? No.
No, but you're getting Barker blind. Use that, Timo. Don't do that. Don't.
What you're doing is you're burning people's eyes when you're just talking. So
I always wanted to do that. You know, Star Wars. You know, Star Wars. You know, I love to do it. No, and I love it. No, go on then. Go on then. Thank you, Ken. So we wanted to be sure that as we as we looked at what we were preparing, would that also fit with the Asian technology that's out there?
I see,
and it does.
Okay, so we look at the technology. So it has been determined that there will be a need for the entire initial segment from Anaheim to San Francisco of a total of 3 maintenance facilities. Is that it? So you have made that initial determination?
Yes. So there'll be one, what we call heavy maintenance facility, where what it stands for, all the heavy work, the 400,000 miles, the lifting of the trucks, if there's any major overhauls required. That's one central large maintenance facility, maybe 2,000 people.
And the assumption is that would be somewhere in the center section, Central Valley area of work, and then there would be some assumption that the 2 lesser intensity maintenance facilities would be closer to the north and south ends. Is that?
Yes, we try to get it as close as we can to the terminal stations.
I see.
Not at the terminal stations.
Thank you. And so the heavy maintenance facility contemplated somewhere in the Central Valley region. That possibly also could be a manufacturing point for the train sets themselves, being contemplated with whatever manufacturer we may select. And you have been discussing that whoever that may be, we would make that a requirement that manufacturing would be would take place there, or some level or some percentage of the overall manufacturing. What are you going to be suggesting in that final request for proposals?
The maintenance depot would be large enough that would allow the assembly of train sets, and we would be talking with the various manufacturers that would bid this, and one of our aims would be that they would manufacture those train sets in California, and beyond that, utilizing the maintenance facility if necessary to assemble them, because it would be a good way to do it, and getting their feedback how practical that is. But it would be the right way to go in our view, and it would be part and parcel, I think, of the overall package, subject to the authority board's review of it, that would be a way forward and would be part of the decision machines ultimately for best value when that procurement process took place.
Okay, I understand that. So you're saying that one centralized heavy overhaul facility would be the largest of the
Much
3.
Bigger than anyone
So
else.
what define that in a general acreage requirement?
200 acres.
200 acres. And
150 to 200 acres.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the smaller maintenance facilities, what would you view those to be?
80 acres.
80?
Well, it's a layover as well, because at the
No, I understand. You don't have to explain it. I just want to know the number, because people are starting to contemplate where those might be, and I know you have. And part of the assessment that's taking place is also some general identification of potential locations for those. Correct? Where are we in that process of identifying any one of those three facilities?
Well, let's deal with the heavy one first. We will probably be going out in the next 2 weeks or so with information relating to the size, shape, format of the heavy maintenance facility, and seeking input from anyone along the Central Valley as to whether they're interested in terms of the location, and interested in talking to us about that location and whether or not it's suitable to meet the requirements. That's the heavy maintenance.
So on that, how do we communicate that to people who may have an interest? How do we solicit that level of information?
Well, in discussions with Medi and the environmental group, our intent is to send that out to all the stakeholders in the Central Valley by letter, by website, to be involved when we talk in the technical working groups, when we meet out in the scoping process.
Okay, so sending it out to stakeholders, and we have means by which we can communicate. Is every county a stakeholder?
Yes.
Is every city a stakeholder?
Yes.
Every redevelopment agency, economic development agency, all of those groups are already on that list. Is that correct? You don't know, but and I don't mean to put you on the spot. All I really want to know is, I believe this is a competitive, important step. This is something that brings value to the authority. I don't want the decision to be made, or to put it, necessarily solely based upon your fine engineering judgment. I would like it to be made using a variety of factors, including the economic value derived to the authority. Are those the types of considerations that would be made in at least discussing that? And how then, Mr. Morshed, does this decision get made?
The maintenance facility, I've asked the team to develop the broad standards that we would require for a maintenance facility, number of acreage, whatever closeness to the track, whatever criteria we're going to use. We need to develop that, and I've asked them to make sure that everyone within the region that we can reach is informed of those requirements. We're also going to treat the location of maintenance facility the same way we treat the selection of the location of the alignment. That it will go through we receive suggestions and ideas from people. All of them will be analyzed in the same way we do the analysis of the alignment itself, and then we will bring those recommendations to the board as part of the environmental document. The environmental document would come to you with the number of station locations that have been studied, the number of alignments that have been studied, with or possibly without the recommendation, what the preferred option should be. It will be public hearings, and eventually.
Okay. I would like to have that issue discussed a little differently, though. So maybe now that I know of what the intent is, I would like. I mean, I don't. How can we make a determination after we go through a full environmental review process where we will see which one may make better sense environmentally? That necessarily isn't the one where the authority will get the highest value. So I think if we determine which one we receive the highest value on, then we consider that within the do the environmental review based upon that, as opposed to setting ourselves up so that we can't consider economic value because we've but if it comes as a point of these three are environmentally reviewed as alternatives, and therefore what is the best environmental alternative, that may not necessarily be the one with the highest economic value. So I want to make sure there's a place where economic value is assessed, and we make a determination. We feel this one or these two should be now processed through the environmental process as opposed to doing it the other way around. I just want to know that is being considered.
Yeah, let me suggest what we are doing now is actually the environmental assessment. So we have to do the environmental assessment before any selection. A part of that assessment is going to be value, cost, etc. However, and I want perhaps Chris and Kerry to elaborate on this, my understanding is that our environmental process were clear alignment and station location. Now, if a potential builder comes in and they want to actually use a different location, they can. The only thing is they would have to go through a separate environmental document to qualify the station. Now, in relation to your suggestion of how we can actually predetermine the station location before and use some other criteria other than environmental, I don't know that. I think that I will have to rely on Chris to find out whether that's actually feasible or not within the environmental process.
All right, that would be good to know whoever is speaking. Can we hear from Chris, though, maybe, if there's, or not?
Always happy to hear from Chris.
Because we've made determinations as where stations are.
You've selected preferred station locations in your program documents.
Right.
And as a part of your project EIR process, you'll be making final decisions on where stations will be located. The maintenance facilities to be needed for this phase one of the system will be addressed in the project EIR documents, and there you'll be considering alternatives for locating them. The criteria for locating them can be established by the board in conjunction with its consultants as to what all you want considered, but obviously your goal is to have a viable HST system, and everything that it needs will have to be addressed in the project EIRs. Now, if you get to the end of the process and you decide you want to consider additional alternatives, then you can conduct further review, and in the project EIR process, you can determine how many different alternatives you want to consider. You must consider a reasonable range of feasible alternatives for the parts of the system that are covered by those documents.
Do we do that for stations? So in the Anaheim to LA section, which northern terminus are we considering as alternatives to LA Union Station?
You're considering different ways of getting into LA Union Station.
Exactly.
You're looking, yes.
But we're looking at one station. We have made a determination that will go there.
Right. You've selected a preferred alternative for that terminus and decided that. But you're looking at alternatives in the configuration of your approach.
I get all that.
Okay.
But what right, and all I'm saying
we haven't done all that for the maintenance facilities, and at the program level, you did not study different locations potentially for maintenance facilities to the same degree that you did for stations.
Did we study more than one?
You only had generally noticed a general area.
And what is that general area?
The Central Valley for the heavy maintenance and layover and light maintenance.
Yeah, but tell me the parameters of the Central Valley. Is it between Bakersfield and Merced? Is that what we said? Or is that the limiter that we put in or not?
You put in the Central Valley and the northern end, but not as a limiter, not precluding consideration of other sites.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we see the full value of that maintenance facility and the economic value of communities, and make sure communities know that the decision will not be solely based upon, is this the most environmentally beneficial to the system, but is this the most beneficial to the system's operation and its full functioning, which also may include the economic value it could provide within a community. Or within the overall Central Valley area. So I worry about getting ourselves to a point where we can never discuss that, and here we have one or two preferred stations locations like we do right now, that's in the programmatic EIR that thankfully doesn't limit us, but certainly in the project level it would limit us.
But you have not at the program level selected a preferred maintenance station.
Okay.
It's wide open.
Very good. Mr. Katz. Yes, Mr. Katz was first. He wishes to pass. Ms. Schenk.
Thank you. Kurt,
yield my time.
I think you've put your finger on sort of a fundamental challenge that we have had all along, and that's why I really commend you for encouraging this workshop. It gives us an opportunity to bring these issues out, and that is, what is the role of the authority in decision making? And if you're given a recommendation, you have the right to say no, but basically you can rubber stamp it or not. And what I think you're getting at, and which I hope you're getting at, is that we want to have a greater role in the policy of this at an earlier point, so that we can, in fact, factor in the kinds of issues that you, or the kinds of matters that you're talking about, because I share that. I think it's important that we have that kind of a decision-making opportunity early enough, so it's not like, we're just rejecting what staff and the consultants are saying, and then we have to explain ourselves as to why. That it's more collaborative early on, so that we can give that kind of input. So the point is, I agree with what you're saying, and I'm glad we're talking about it at this point.
Well, and I think this is a good topic to be brought to the Operations Committee to be able to fully vet what values we should derive in that decision-making process. And one of them is, I'll be really transparent. I think this is such a benefit to any community in which it is. Right. There should be communities falling over themselves to provide us free land and welcoming us into their communities and working with us. And I want to make sure that we properly tell everybody how they can communicate with us, how they can think about moving forward with this, and how they can present a proposal to us, which can be considered on a variety of factors, mainly how it can contribute to the value of the statewide system.
May I suggest that, if I could just add to that, that not only the operations but the Finance Committee have an opportunity to look at this as well.
Very good. Mr. Katz.
The one thing that I would assume we cannot require is that they build a manufacturing facility in California, and I assume the federal rules preclude us from doing that, as I'm spending way too much time exploring in Los Angeles right now with a rail car contract. But are there things we can do to encourage, what can we do to get as much of this money that our taxpayers are paying spent in California?
Well, I think, first of all, right from the top of my head, you've got to go back to Washington and see what we can and cannot do as it applies to, Buy America. But there are a number of international manufacturers of high-speed train sets that already have factories and work here in the United States. And so, I'm shooting from the hip, but because we're still getting into this, I don't see any reason why we cannot manufacture and assemble high-speed train sets in California.
There's no reason why we can't do it. There is a federal law that precludes you from giving a preference to do it or requires it, and I'm trying to figure out how we can be creative and sort of push that as much as possible. I appreciate that 50 states can do it. There's only one I really care about. The other 49 can fend for themselves. And so, considering the fact our taxpayers are putting up all the money, now I know we're going through this in L.A. with a rail car contract right now, and there may be, in fact, a rail car manufacturer in Los Angeles by the time this is online. But are there things we can, we're facing, everybody knows the unemployment, everybody knows what's going on here. The billions of dollars that are at stake here would go a long way to paying back our taxpayers for what they're investing here. So I guess my challenge or question, and I don't need an answer today, but I would really like to put on the agenda, both through the project management side and also the legal side, what's the farthest we can go to encourage someone to spend the bucks here?
Okay. Understand.
Very good. I know there's quite a few members that have questions. Yes, if you'd like to respond to that, then Mr. Kopp and Mr. Dearden.
I just wanted to add, in the consideration of the maintenance facilities issue, to make the board aware that the program staff is developing guidelines for considering alternatives for maintenance facilities and has that underway, and expects that just as with the alternatives for alignments and stations, there will be a thoroughly vetted process for bringing forward options for those locations, contacting local government, contacting manufacturers, contacting the public along the alignments to make sure that there's an opportunity for people to weigh in on it. So I wanted to make that point. And of course, Board Member Katz is correct. There's a constitutional limitation in the form of the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution that limits some of our ability to require things.
Details. Mr. Kopp.
Yes.
Yes. And although the reference was made to selecting an environmentally preferable location, what CEQA requires is that you identify what would be environmentally superior, but you're not required in every instance to pick that particular alternative.
If it's acceptable with a couple of the board members and to allow, Ms. Galgiani had a quick question, Mr. Durdon, Mr. Umberg, is that all right? Sure. Thank you. Okay.
I just wanted to comment in response to Mr. Katz's question. I do have a bill, and I've been working with the Authority for Technical Assistance on it. It's Assembly Bill 733 that encourages the consideration of the number of jobs in California when selecting companies to do some of the work. So we've gotten it over to the Senate side. We've had no problems with it, but we're using the word encouraging rather than requiring.
Thank you. Mr. Durdon.
I think my issue's been covered. The two elements are economic stimulation to the local economy as being one of the criteria for bid selection. The second element being the creation of a maintenance base, a heavy maintenance base, while you're doing the final assembly. So if both of those were criteria in the bid document, if you can make them legally criteria in the bid document, that pretty much establishes the requirement, de facto, of having the assembly facility in California.
Right.
And in the area, in the facility, ultimately will be the heavy maintenance base.
Yeah, there's 1,500 to 2,000 jobs in that place.
Very good. Mr. Umberg.
A couple questions. First question is with respect to each segment. So system's going to be built in segments, one of the segments being Los Angeles to Anaheim, right? Mm-hmm. We hope that each segment is operational in its own right? No. In other words, that there's independent utility between Los Angeles and Anaheim so that we can operate that section before the rest of the system is operational.
No, for high-speed trains, no.
So there won't be, well, then I need to way back up. The section between Los Angeles and Anaheim won't be operated if it's built first, independent of the construction of the rest of the system?
No, it'll be built. One of the things I'd like to get to eventually, I think, is the difference between, given what Mehdi has said earlier, that if we have the money and the will, then the difference between building and finishing the first section, which is no doubt is Lausanne in terms of time scale, and finishing the full section between Anaheim and San Francisco is not much more than 12 months. The thing is, if Lausanne is the first, then it would be very difficult, I wouldn't say impossible, to control bringing any train into that, high-speed train into that corridor for that period of time. There's no connection from there through to the Central Valley, to the Central Control Room, all the communications that go with it, and the testing and commissioning that needs to be done in the Central Valley. So what I would like to show you later is how we believe we can link this, and then how we would stage the work in Lausanne.
So if I understand correctly, there won't be a single rider on the system until the entire system between Anaheim and San Francisco is built?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
We just talked about Los Angeles.
Okay. The Los Angeles to Anaheim segment, will that ever be operated just as the Los Angeles to Anaheim segment?
Not for high-speed train, no.
Okay.
There.
Just not say never. Excuse me.
All right.
It will when it's linked.
Well, but no, Mr. Daniels, that doesn't help get that answered properly. Mr. Morshed, could you clarify?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We've talked about building different segments and having some utility for that segment while we are completing the system. Okay, the segments that we're building will have utility for some existing operations that could be used while we are finishing the rest of the system. Anaheim to LA, for example, could have an independent utility for use by Metrolink or Amtrak or others to use it because it's additional tracks, an additional facility. They can add safety, reliability, other things to their existing operation. But there will be no high-speed train on it. The same thing between San Francisco and Los Angeles. You can build San Francisco and San Jose, that when we complete the 4 tracking and all of that activity, Caltrain, who is a current commuter service, can continue and run service on that corridor until such time that we have a high-speed train procured and commissioned and ready to service. In the Central Valley, we're talking about building of some segments that have utility, but that utility would be to Amtrak or some other entity, but not a high-speed train itself.
So just to further get a better explanation, that will the control systems be built as we build the Los Angeles to Anaheim section? Will the electrical system be built at the same time?
I would like to deal with that. All the questions I've got in a progression, okay. And it would help
so
me.
we will hold these questions till after you make that presentation,
please, yes.
because there will be a discussion as to the challenges, how to really get trains into that section and operating with the high-speed train, even though the track may be built. And of course, the whole discussion will be we want to get high-speed trains in that section, even though they may not be going at the highest speed they otherwise may, but we want to see that progression as to how that system can be opened up and available for that service, and we'll see that a little later in the presentation.
Yes.
But on
those cars,
right?
As the chairman stated,
that's where we want to get to understand what Mr. Daniels is going to present to us, and in the later section you will.
Yes.
Got it?
With a better answer.
Right. And in between then and now, I know Commissioner Flores would like to be heard. Ms. Flores.
Yes, I have a question with regard to the maintenance facilities. In that I know that in the past, I think we've received at least 2 proposals. Do those folks need to do their request again, or does that stand, or do they have enough information?
I'm sorry, there was too much going on there. May I ask you to restate?
I'll have to use my mother's voice here.
Yes, please. All right, Mehdi, I think we were not properly respectful of Ms. Flores, who has the floor. Yes.
My question was with regard, and I know that we've received, I think, at least 2 proposals for maintenance facilities. My question is whether or not these folks will be contacted to either update, because I know it's been some time since those came in, or what do they do?
The answer is yes, they will be contacted, and what they've provided us in terms of their suggestion for maintenance facility will be incorporated into the analysis.
Yes.
On the maintenance facility, one of the things the authority has done, I'm covering the valley from Bakersfield to Sacramento. I had to think for a second. But most of the Valley is very well of the maintenance facility, Palmdale, sorry, maintenance facility issue, and a lot of the towns or cities have hired folks to pursue obtaining, for their town. They understand the jobs it's bringing, and the COGs are aware of it. The Soaking Valley Partnership is aware of it. So there's been a lot. The Valley is very well aware of it and excited about it and understands what it's bringing and economic interests in terms of, there's people out there willing to give land. So there's a lot of talk about it.
Great. So the answer is yes, those two will be notified and everyone else will be notified. But I guess I want to kind of put forward the focus that this board will make that determination. And therefore, there needs to be a process by which all of those applications can be fairly evaluated, and that will be a decision that will be brought before this board for a final determination. So it's something we all should be put on notice of because that's a significant decision. Mr. Gallegos, I know you wish to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To your question of economic benefit, I briefly wanted to share something that we've recently been doing that may be helpful to you. For years, we've been doing environmental impact studies. That's very common. I think your attorneys are advising you. And one of the things we're doing in San Diego is complementing those with an economic benefit study. So that when we live in a complicated world where we're trying to balance many, many issues so that we can come back with our policymakers and not only share what the environmental impacts are, but what are the economic benefits. And so I just briefly wanted to share that because that's something we've recently started doing that I think will have big value for policymakers like yourselves, and so I just wanted to briefly share that.
Thank you. And maybe you could share with us offline what you include in economic benefits, how you go about preparing that, and to what level is significant for you to be assisted in making a decision.
Yeah, we'd be glad to sit down with your executive director and talk about what we're doing in our RTP as we speak.
Thank you. So with that, we're talking about the heavy facility, but also the other two. Are we going through the same process in terms of identifying where there might be opportunity and engaging local communities in that?
Yes.
Solicitation?
Yes.
We are. And those are job creators as well?
Yes.
Very good. And when will those, that solicitation of locations be initiated?
The same time as the heavy maintenance, in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, very good. So people who are aware or interested or know of someone or have an idea, this would be the time in which they get engaged. Is this available for communication by interested parties on our website?
Yes.
So there is a way that they can be notified or they can submit information or receive it through the website, correct?
Yes.
All right. Very good. Mr. Deardon.
One little thing kind of nagged at me when we were talking about not running high-speed trains on the two starter elements at first.
I didn't say that. I'm talking about Los Angeles.
That's what I was. That's
not
what
the
I
other
was
elements.
Check.
Mr. Daniel.
We gave Mr. Daniels a break to be able to fully explain that and then grill him really hard when he does.
Please.
Tony, as I understood it, we can order the high-speed train sets. You create your specifications. You do it through the bid process. We select the bidder. We can order those high-speed train consists and have them operating at lower speeds, probably on the Anaheim to L.A. and San Francisco to San Jose portions, maybe a portion in the Central Valley, before the rest of the system is in operation. But they would not be controlled by centralized train control, and they would have to operate at lower speeds. Is that a proper statement?
It's something that could happen. It would be expensive, and what I would like to do is show you perhaps why you might not want to do that, though you might want to do it for public relations in some places. But in reality, it would be costly.
All right, so let's continue with your presentation if there's no other questions on this. Thank you.
All right, so that's the maintenance facility, and we did that, and then we moved to the next slide, which is electrification, right. So one of the other things where we're up to on the electrification side, we have established based on the timetable, based on the power requirements of the trains, we've established all the locations for the phase one system in terms of where the supply stations are, where the paralleling stations are, where the switching stations are, their size, and where we need to interconnect with the high voltage transmission lines. And we are working with the PUC, well, you can read it, Southern Cal Ed. We are currently in discussions with them. We've started a dialogue as to what we need to do and how we need to proceed and how that will affect the environmental document, because there are many miles of transmission line that may be required depending on ultimately where these substations are. This information has been passed to the regional consultants, and they're working with it. We've also, on the electrification side, produced and finalize our directive drawings. So as far as the OCS is concerned, both at 120 overhead contact systems, at 125 miles an hour and 220 miles an hour, what those are, so they can start using those as they begin to lay out their overhead system with the power requirements necessary for the sections that we're working on. We have also started the process in the very early days of preparing the specifications for the train control system. That gives us the automatic train protection, automatic train control. It gives us a means, as we've talked earlier, to avoid the train-to-train collisions, any overspeed derailments, and many other things that are attributable to the positive train control. We are also in the process of finishing, it's finished basically, the criteria to develop the 15% designs. That's required for the environmental work to be completed. We've gone all through the technical memorandum to allow those designs to meet the 220 mile an hour trains that we expect to run on the line. We have completed the alignment, curve, gradient, unbalance, all the things that go with these trains, the aerial structure design and tunnel design, the track turnouts and stations, the guidelines for the siting of the stations and the requirements that are needed in there. We've dealt with the geotechnical and the seismic pieces, where and how we should look at design life and utilities. Perhaps important for the board to recognize, and I think many of the board already know this, we haven't done this in isolation. We've had workshops with the French, with the Germans, with the Japanese, with the Spanish. They've had in the workshops input into designs and where we're going, and whether or not we're in the right direction or not. And they continue to be ongoing. It is our intention, and I think I'll say this now in case I forget, to continue that dialogue as we move forward to the 30%. As we move forward, and when we get to the procurement side, which Kent is going to talk about, we will welcome the suppliers, the operators from different parts of the world to continue inputting to what we're proposing. So we're not going forward blind or in isolation, and I would like, Mr. Chairman, for you to know that.
Well, thank you for sharing with me, but let's make sure all the commission members know it.
Yes, I'm using you as a prime target, that was all. All right. What else are we doing? Hang on. Yeah. Well, the other important thing is, as we begin to move forward, we've been spending an awful lot of time and continue to do in trying to get the standards, the regulatory pieces, the system side, the consistency. But now with the beginning of, in particular, Los Angeles, you'll see in a few minutes, I hope, where we are with that. We will be getting from the 8 regional consultants as we go forward in the next, 12 months or 18 months, maybe 10 or 15,000 drawings that they'll be producing and specifications. So we're trying to develop a means, and we have developed a means by which we don't wait for them all to come in. We're trying to speed up the process, and I know we will talk about the speed up process a little bit later. So we have over-the-shoulder means by which we will work with the regional consultants to speed the documents through so we can get to the environmental process end product with the rod and nod as quickly as possible. Having said we've got to the 15%, what is perhaps as important is to set the standards and look for where we're going to go with the 30% documents, because they will be the ones that will be in the procurement package camera ready to go out to the bid. And we've moved on now from that 15% to develop what's necessary for the regional consultants to produce a set of documents that are biddable, that you can look and see it'll be apples for apples. And there's no shortcuts for those major contractors and manufacturers out there that are going to bid on this job. On the regulatory side, I have to repeat the tremendous support that we've had from the FRA and the people that work there in trying to work forward with this this daunting task of finalizing the rule of particular applicability and operating through the TSIs. And that's been a major breakthrough for us, because what is required also at the end of this process under the AN 50126, the RAMs, the reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety process, we have to go through a verification of the designs, and it's a fairly long-winded, complicated piece before you get to what I will be talking about later is the test section, where you validate all the work that's gone on from a technical point of view earlier, and it's a very rigid system that needs to be gone through, so we get ultimately to the end that you can get a certificate to run these trains for revenue service. It's highly structured, it's time consuming, but if we don't do that, we ain't going to make it. And we have to do that. This process, we're in the middle of running and moving with the FRA. Likewise, we are continuing to work with the PUC to clear these beautiful rules, which Bob Donahue over there has been struggling with for a while. It's not as easy as it looks. That they're extremely delicate, but there's no reason on earth why we cannot get 25 kV in California. It operates in the rest of the United States where they're running these trains. There's no reason we can't do it here with goodwill, good health, and a passion to do it. And at the same time, we're working, because one of the oppositions, of course, until they know what's taking place, is the various railroads. They want to make sure that where they're operating is not going to be affected with their signaling side with the effects you have from AC traction. And we're in the process of meeting and discussing with every single railroad operator in California where we're going with that. On the environmental side, I said earlier, we've developed some magnificent, that's the only word for it, guidelines and standards by which the regional consultants are working. I like that bridge, by the way. It's those who've worked, look at this. Let me just look at this a minute. Point. Look, that's the train. So you get some idea of the length of those in the civil engineering, the slenderness ratio. Just look at that. That train is 200 meters or more. So you get some idea what this looks like. Heck of a job. Heck of a job that is. I mean, it's worth doing. It's worth building this for the sake of doing something like that. Sorry? Oh. I thought you were going to take it from me.
Please continue.
All right. Let's see. I'm sorry about that, guys, really. Ladies. I am.
No, we understand.
We've never seen you so.
Well, when you see something like that, you want to go, wow, you know. Anyway, without the gun, where are we? I guess one of the important things in producing the environmental document is a way by which we can keep the documentation. Now, we can keep track of it, because ultimately you never know who's going to challenge where we are. And with Christine and her gang and the authority staff, we've put together a record-keeping process which I think will allow us to do that. Is that right? I think so, yeah. We were talking earlier about the independent utility. Well, we have done that in the environmental process, and we'll talk about what that independent utility can be, in particular when we get down to Lawson. We've looked at various policies that impact, like the parking at stations, the noise, traffic, the effects on wildlife, and there are many of those. Now, this is the one I think the board would be probably as interested in. Where are we? You know, we've done a lot of talking about the responsibilities and who's what to whom. So where are we?
But before we get to this, if you don't mind backing up, we have gotten all of these stages and all of the issues identified up to here, and now you're going to show us where are we in each of the segments, correct?
Yes.
All right, I want to make sure I know that. So I want to make sure if there are any questions from the commission or from the public at this time. If you wish to be heard from the public, please stand at the microphone. You'll be recognized. Any commission member have questions at this time? Very good. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Do I have to push anything?
Identify yourself for the record with...
Hello? Okay, good. My name is Roger Baisley. I'm from San Francisco. One basic concern is the guidance on the safety issues. Both operationally is one set of safety guidelines, but where the public and meets and the infrastructure meets the ground, where the public is entering the train, where the public, where the train facilities are coordinating, are impacting the local environment, the local areas such as the urban area. What I'm referring to is there's been a real fragmentation and basically multiple layers of safety regulations in this country. Can we, in this situation, set a higher standard, a higher bar of what we demand by looking at the wonderful things that have been done in Europe and throughout the world, by putting the best examples of pedestrian safety, such as if you have a station, it impacts a certain local environment, that we have a consistency and a uniformity throughout the whole system. The Wayfair signing is uniform. Just like your branding, the logo and corporate identity aspects is uniform.
Thank you,
the more we do that, the more clear the impact will be in the safety. But what I'm saying is that just not going by just Caltrans, the MUTC guide manuals, to wherever these stations and facilities sit down, that we need to use the best bar of standards in both traffic and pedestrian safety impacts with these facilities wherever they're placed.
Well, thank you. You wanted to make us aware of that concern you have. The one-word answer that they will have will be yes, but I think more important to that is just the fact you wanted us all to be aware as we are moving forward with all the design and planning, from that visual effect to the station impacts. It is a very good point, and I ask you to share it with us a few more times between now and the time we build this. So thank you very much.
So I'm looking for a development of a uniform master planning at the beginning stages so that it doesn't end up a trickle-down situation, which is usually a situation when local areas run out of money to put these, because these are going to put pressures on local budgets of those areas to make standards wherever there's connectivity nodes or hubs of multimodal transportation connectivity in a particular areas that people are trying to plan these stops. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Stephen Thamp. I live in Orange County. I'm an engineer with over 40 years experience knowing how a project starts and ends, where it stops. And my concern and question is, having seen the Florida Fox didn't go through and Texas Triangle didn't go through, and this is the best in capital of California, by the way, and I see $8 billion there. I think I'm very impressed about the team, how it's going forward. However, I have a concerned question. You push the red button on where the maintenance facilities would be. That alone would be a challenge. And economic viability, Larry Garrigus just answered that, how we could address that. How about consensus building for the whole alignment? And the board member Katz mentioned, can we operate a train by itself? And I think the answer was, yeah, it can, not high speed. But my bigger question is, are we learning any lessons from Texas Triangle didn't go through because finally they decided they don't want to build because of many other things we haven't foreseen. What do we do to stop this so we don't spend the money, find out that we can't really build it? Is there a concern? If it is, how are we going to address that?
Well, I think we have addressed that. This authority was established in 1996. We are the furthest along of any similar type project with a program level EIR that is approved. Voters of the state have a level of confidence that they authorize $9 billion worth of capital spending to be provided, and now we'll see if the same level of confidence is there with the federal government as they contemplate how to distribute $15 billion that they have designated as available for high-speed rail. So I think we could look at examples of systems that have failed. I think what you heard from Mr. Daniels is, in fact, we are working with those systems that have succeeded. Unfortunately, they're all in other countries, but we're going to be working and coordinating with them to see how they succeeded and figuring out how to ensure that this project can succeed as well. So I think we've learned a lot of lessons and using a lot of that input along the way. So thank you for presenting your concern and caution. Any other comments? Now, seeing none, we'll go back towards the schedule that you have, and now we'll look at segment by segment and where we stand in each area. Thank you, Mr. Daniels.
And the first one is Anaheim to Los Angeles. And if you look at the way we've structured it, to engineering and then the environmental work, where we want to get to for the final EIR, EIS, record of decision and nod, and the 30% design, which is planned to be completed at the time of the rod and nod because our procurement process is calling for qualification. Well, Kent will go through it, but ultimately we'll have camera ready all the technical documents to enable us to go out, as well as the commercial and financial stuff. If you look where we are here, the timescale, we left the boards at the back. Hopefully you had a chance to look at it at the break. But we're in the, I think, 48% range, and more or less the same on the environmental side. This is not a true picture of where we're going to complete, because an awful lot of work has gone on up to now on the alternatives, on staging. There's been, and this applies to all the groups, there's been a real stop-go on the budget, so there's been no continuity to get this moving as fast as we can. If you look at the dates out there, then you can see that by sometime, I think it's in March, currently 011. What? Oh, I thought you were. Then we look to be ready to go out for procurement documents in terms to the bidders, and there's a process before that where we'll take it. The question is, can we beat the targets that we're going to show out here? And I believe that we can. I believe that if we can have no break in the volume of revenue that's coming in for the various consultants, and I don't mean this in a funny way, then we can accelerate where we're going to go. I also believe that we need to talk further, I think, with the board members and the authority. What can we do to speed up if any, the time between when we complete all the documents and the process by which the reviews of those documents take place? And any time we can save in that will make a huge effect on when we can get into construction. In particular, when we talk of the three sections I have up there first, which is under the stimulus plan. So by far away, the furthest is the Los Angeles corridor in the kind of 50% level for all the work that's taking place. We believe, I think, come by the end of the year, the 15% design will be complete, and we're moving to the administrative document for the EIR, EIS in the early part of 2010. It's the time scale beyond that takes a lot of time. If we look at the...
And Mr. Daniels, just so that I understand, when you get to the engineering work done, just the final EIR elements in terms of approvals of all required government entities that are processing this. Is it correct that that's about a year that you have budgeted, 12 months, give or take, just to get the various government entities to approve the engineering work that you will have done?
It's not necessarily the engineering. The engineering isn't the root cause. It's the fact that you need that level of engineering for all the environmental process to take place, and there's a definite time once you release the administrative document for the various stakeholders of California to review it and look at it.
No, I understand, but that's about a year.
Yeah.
You have budgeted in each of these about a year in that final review of that EIR.
In that order, yes.
Yeah. So if things happen quicker, if government processes, some are statutory requirements for public viewing and such, but if some of those
budget to be able to bring staff on to drive it forward. So we believe that with the focus we're starting to put onto the job, that we can also take some months out of the overall design and environmental work.
Thank you, Mr. Katz.
I think your comment's accurate in terms of resources to date. I think the other thing, though, you need to appreciate as part of that, now that we have some but not all of the resources we need, we have to deliver faster and better and smarter in order to help build confidence with the voters or the private sector where we're going to have to make up the rest of the money. So I agree with your comment about it took us a long time to get to this point, but now that we're here, we got to move expeditiously.
Yeah, that's the plan.
And that's what the chairman's trying to do.
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
Well, it is
very good. Mr. Dearden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It isn't only the confidence issue that's terribly important, especially when we're working with private investors, but ARA says absolutely that we must have the stimulus funds in effect by having contracts let and contractors working on the ground by September of 2012. Otherwise, we give the money back. Even though we might win the stimulus funds, the ARA grants, if we don't have them executed in contracts, we lose them in September 2012. So there are some real deadlines facing us. And we have to have matching funds to use our bond funds. So a whole lot depends on having the contracts let and in effect by September 2012.
Yes.
Mr. Dearden, there's nobody wants to build this more than I do.
Okay, and so let's build in Merced and Bakersfield. So what's that all about?
Okay, this is also part of the stimulus program, and what I would like to show, we can go through each one of them, but the difference, which is what I was talking about earlier, between these dates, and I can go back, if I put them all on for a minute and then go back, there's not a lot of difference between the finishing and the rod and nod and this. And when I look at the next set of slides where we've got the master schedule to take us to revenue service, all things being equal, again, there's not a lot of time. And that's when I'd like to discuss the Lawson situation. So if you check this out in particular, give me the gun. There we go. And everybody close their eyes, I think. No, I'm going to do this. I want to do this. No, I want to do this. There. I have it. Just look how close these are. This is the one, the Palmdale, mainly because we're starting late. What do you think it is? Just see if it's fixed on my microphone. There you go. Use that. It doesn't affect the microphone. It's got a button right there. Like that?
Did your parents let you have a water gun when you were a kid, by the way, John?
No, this is fun.
No, I know, but let's get to work here. Enough of the fun.
All right. Really, my point is, this is the one that's ahead of the game. That's the Lausanne corridor, but these are not too far off each other. And when you get to the construction side, there's still only the 12 to 14 months, and to enable the whole system to operate between Anaheim and San Francisco, you need to link the Central Valley to LA and Anaheim. And at the moment, that final link, the Bakersfield-Palmdale, is the last piece to go in. So I'm not saying this is cast in concrete, it's just the way in which, and when I look at and discuss, I hope, how we're looking to link this, you can ask the question and say, why don't we do this?
Yeah, we'll ask that in a second. But so the starburst ones are those projects that this board has suggested would be in track 2.
Yes.
Which in the stimulus funds. But the other 3 segments Carrie was suggesting, and maybe you could clarify this, are all segments, have we applied in our preliminary application some funding in any one of the 3 tracks of our era funding or whatever it is? Have we applied for funding in all of these 6 tracks for federal stimulus money or not?
No.
Yes. Well, no. Yes. Yes and no. The original application that we submitted included request for funding for construction on 3 segments, but also had a blanket request for all the environmental and 30% engineering for the entire system. So there's a distinction there for construction. There's 3 corridors for environmental planning and engineering all. And that's because that's how the eligibility lines up.
And that's why we that third or track 3 is for that planning work, and that's where we have put in an application. Is that correct? All right, thank you. Very good. This is good, Tony. Please continue.
We also, this is the position as it relates to the other 3 sections, the Sacramento to Merced, Los Angeles to San Diego, and the Ultimate Pass. These 3 sections have had a much more limited budget, and consequently, their amount of work that they've done in the last 18 months or so has been restricted heavily by the amount of revenue that they've managed to take, and that revenue or that budget has been used very heavily from an outreach point of view rather than physically carrying out any design or environmental work.
Yeah, Tony, just so that I understand, on the Los Angeles, San Diego, that yellow and green, I mean, I can't see it real well, but does that mean that service there will start in, is that 13?
The Nod and Rod, that's when that will be the completion, all things being equal, the completion of the record of decision and the notice of determination. It's at that point, if we had the money, we would go out for construction.
So construction won't even start?
No, but I have a separate schedule to show the finish of construction and revenue service. This is just, these charts I put on at the moment are only to take you to the record of decision and notice of determination, which is the essential pieces, and that's where we've got a real arm around, where we've really herded the cats to take us ready for going out for construction. And I have a separate schedule, which I'll follow on in a second, showing that construction schedule.
Well, but from what I'm seeing here, the Los Angeles-San Diego piece, which I might just repeat again, is the second busiest Amtrak corridor in the United States, will be the last one to be constructed, even after Sacramento, Merced. Am I reading that correctly?
No, that would be up to the authority board to decide.
From this
chart. Technically, that's the best current position we see relative to finishing those documents.
Okay, well, it should surprise no one that I'm going to want to revisit that afresh. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
But what this chart tells us is present programming where the environmental work will be completed as to what gets funded for construction. Therefore, there are 9 separate categories or segments the 6 on the preceding page and these 3, correct?
Yeah.
This is presenting to us what would happen under the best possible scenario, but we do not have money to build all 9 of those segments, even if all of that environmental work is done. So part of the next discussion will be, how can we ensure there is enough money to match the progress that we see in the environmental clearance process? Because under the construction process, we don't have enough money to build all of those that will be approved in 2011 or 12, let alone what would be in 2013. So we need to continue to be diligent and figure that out so that we can match those construction dollars with the approvals of the environmental clearance, correct? I mean, our goal will be, yes, it's the right answer.
Okay. It's quite...
Yes, Mr. Dearden.
It's quite able to...
Tony, could I comment a little bit there, because that kind of gives me a hopeless feeling, and I think there is some hope in regard to, in fact, it looks very strongly like there's hope in regard to additional sources of federal funding. And it is significant that the amount of funding in this year's appropriation bill has gone up dramatically from that requested by the President. He requested $1 billion. We're up over $2 billion. In fact, the House side has had $4 billion in it. The Chair Oberstar has $50 billion in the reauthorization bill, the Surface Transportation Authorization Act. So it may be that we will have the money, Mr. Chairman, and I think if we fight hard at the federal level and maintain our primacy among the other corridors in the nation as the #1 corridor, I think there will be the money when we need it.
Okay, good. I was just trying to reassure Ms. Schenk that just because the environmental clearance is done doesn't mean all the projects are going to be funded for construction, because we don't have today in our bank account money to do it. We're going to have to work hard to figure that out, both on private, federal, local, as well as other state resources. We got a big job ahead of us, so thank you, Mr. Dearden, for clarifying that.
Okay.
Mr. Daniels.
On the program management side, it's quite difficult to put the percentages on us because it's a moving target, and we're there to the end. The only thing that perhaps is real is the on what we have produced. Maybe 50% of all the engineering work that we have to enable this whole project to be complete, based on what I was talking about earlier. On the current ridership, we're in the 90% level, and it will depend largely on what the authority wishes to do over the next 6 or 9 months with additional ridership work that's necessary to complete choosing a station, for example, between, well, just choosing the stations, and some work that we need to clean up relative to some of the boardings that we have at some of the major stations. Now, this one here shows where we think we could be, all things being equal, to take you to revenue service. And again, I'd like to bring the attention of the board how close those red dots are. And I'll go back again in a minute. If you look at, let's go right to the beginning. You look at the sections, Los Angeles to Anaheim, which finishes earlier than anywhere else. And we've looked at this from a construction point of view. You could take some of these sections and beat the time. But if you stagger them and you pitch your contracts and you bring them together in a way which I'd like to explain on the test side, on the test and commissioning side, and the court system side, then you could work an arrangement whereby there's only 12 to 14 months between one end and the next. And that's the answer I think I have somewhat to the question that Board Member Katz raised about what's happening down in Lausanne. Because for us to, and it's you could do it. You could set up do all the electrification for that one section. You could load the train sets on a set of lorries and take them down there and put them on the track. You could set up a discrete central control, but for 12 months, you could argue, would it be worth it? You're running 30 miles, you're running these trains at 110 miles an hour. It's possible, and you need far more discussion whether you really need to do that.
Let me, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Cupp.
110 miles an hour or 125 miles an hour?
Now, the Los Angeles corridor, we're pitching at 110 because it's only 30 miles.
How about San Jose, San Francisco?
125 miles an hour.
25, huh?
125.
Okay.
Mr. Katz.
I was going to say, in that corridor, we'd be happy with 50 or 60 on any method of transportation, but in terms of the electrification, and my apologies if this has been considered before I got on the commission, so let me just ask, have we considered using right-of-way for solar installation as well to offset some of that power?
What we've said is what's been agreed by the board is that we will go for 100% green power.
Okay, so is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay.
No, it's not a yes.
Well, not necessarily.
We have not taken any steps to address right-of-way for solar generation along the route. We have taken a position to ensure that it's green power, or to say that that would be green power. What Mr. Katz is talking about is that segment is the one segment probably in all of the high-speed rail where there's more public utilities, the Anaheim Public Utility being the third largest in the state, and the LA Department of Water and Power being the first largest in the state. There's a little more flexibility that could occur there. So the answer is no. We have not looked at how we could put solar generation along that route.
Yeah, I misjudged your question. I thought you were talking about the actual power. I hadn't realized you're talking about a specific right-of-way. No, we haven't done that.
I appreciate that, but I'd like, Mr. Chair, however is appropriate, but I think that where it's applicable, we ought to be looking to see, and it may not generate enough to make a difference, but I think we ought to at least take a look and see if we can do
it. So, thank you. That's a very good idea, and I think one that we should consider in a variety of ways. I mean, people ask all the time, and I think every one of the members of the authority and certainly all of the engineering team get the question of, well, when is this going to happen? And we think high-speed rail is happening right now. That all of this work and all this investment and all of the engineering and environmental work that's required to get to even the start of construction. And once we get to the start of construction, be it in 2012 or 13 or 14 or 15, in contemplation, we should be, if all the money's there, we should be in construction in every corridor, give or take, by about that time. It's all a matter of getting the environmental clearance and money. And yet, when we're in the corridor, all of these charts represent a construction timeline of anywhere from 6 to 8 years to build within that corridor. And that therefore builds this tremendous anticipation and challenge. And I don't think people really understand the level of requirement to build something this massive. I will tell you there's one grade separation in the city of Anaheim. It's Imperial Highway. If you get off the 91 freeway to go to Richard Nixon's birthplace in Yorba Linda, you'll see this massive bridge being built by Caltrans, and the construction of the one bridge over the BNSF Railroad and La Palma Street is taking over 5 years. That is its natural construction timeline. It's nothing else. It costs $100 million for one grade separation, and it will take 5 years of construction time. So people may think this stuff just happens once you pass a bond, or once we get federal money, or once we get environmental clearance, or once we issue a construction contract. There's a lot more that has to happen. Even when we've got every single signal that says go, there's a lot more that has to occur. And I think that between now and if, in fact, the Los Angeles to Anaheim segment is the first one to get built, if, in fact, that is, it may or may not be, but if it is, you're looking at revenue service starting maybe in the first quarter or the first half of the year in 2018.
Correct.
That's a long way off. And I think it does allow us, though, to try to be, as we're thinking of high-speed rail and forward thinking of that mode of transportation itself, we also should be starting to really consider being forward thinking in a lot of other things we do. And maybe one of those is how do we provide electricity to this segment and how that's going to be operated. But also, if during all of this time, think about that, that'll be 10 years after voters passed a bond, the first segment operating. I know you said that you thought if, in fact, a high-speed train were to operate in that first segment, it might need to be done more possibly for public interest or awareness to show that the segment is going, but that, in fact, once we get these segments going, it takes a year or 2 years to test the trains, to have the trains ready to be able to even operate in that segment. So you're suggesting even when the track is all done, there might be revenue activity going on, but we haven't built the rest of the track. We haven't been able to test the other train sets. Therefore, we're not ready to build in this segment. You may not have said that. Mehdi shared that with me. So I want to... All right, Tony, you can just hold off.
I'm trying to...
And maybe listen to what I have to say. Because there will be a focus between now and the next 9 years. If that section or any other is up and ready to operate, we will figure out how to operate some high-speed train using that train in that segment. And it may be a challenge. It may be difficult. And it certainly won't be a part of a whole system. And it certainly won't go as fast as we ultimately want it to go. But between now and then, we'll figure out how to do that. And that has to be part of our challenge as well, because I think we are asking for a public indulgence for a long time to work with us and get to this stage. And when we get to that stage, we've got to be prepared to take that step and ensure that people do see things are operating in a different way. Now, that may mean it may be difficult to get a train there. We may have to have it there for show purposes to get the public aware, but during the daily activity we may have to use, for example, a Metrolink train in that corridor, but people know that the only reason that's happening isn't because we're not able to move the train there, it's because it hasn't been properly tested and certified and available for service in that corridor. It can't be for any other reason, because if it is tested, if it's ready to run, and we just are concerned about a few dollars or a bit of inconvenience to get it operating there, that can't be the reason to tell people they need to wait another year or two before they operate that train within that segment. So, in fact, if it is such that we have to build a test track in the Central Valley and work on building those train sets and test those trains for a couple years before they're certified, I think the public will accept that level of delay as we make sure this is the safest and most available system. But I don't really think the public will be accepting if we just say it's not convenient or available or might be a little more expensive for us to get those trains operating within that segment. We should be prepared to operate those trains there as soon as that track is available, as soon as the systems are in place, and as soon as there's available train sets that are legally allowed to be operated in that area.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Kopp.
A question. Explain the test track, Merced, to Bakersfield as far as time is concerned. How does that fit in relation to other sections?
That's what I would like to do. It comes in the next
thing.
We'll get there in some detail on the importance of the test track.
Number two, a comment. It has been widely purveyed, and opponents of this project use it with some disdain. Just last night, I had that experience on Air America. That, consistent with the chairman's comments, we're going to open for revenue service section by section.
Any other comments on this? Thank you. I think we've worked our way through some of that. It does show the daunting aspect of our responsibility. Please continue, Mr. Daniels.
All right. Let's see. What all I wanted to say to you is that right now we're current status, we've kept within the budget, we've kept within the schedule that we'd set ourselves out. I mentioned earlier it's been a slow ramp up, now we're ready to go. Now, steps of revenue service, and this is the trick. I want to talk about the overall concept, about the linking. We've just been touching where we are with 30% design in the right-of-way. Ken's going to talk about the delivery contracts, but I'd like to talk, if time allows, it would be important, in my view, to talk about the approach to staging the work and the testing commissioning, because that's the area where I think you can see how these things come together and why they're necessary and why the core system is critical. So if I look at the overall concept that we...
Mr. Daniels,
Tony,
real quick. Mr. Dearden.
As you know, there's a very substantial test track for rail equipment in Pueblo, Colorado. I can understand why we might want to do a test track as part of our overall system. I think Ed especially wants one. But we would we not be able to test some of the early rolling stock at Pueblo on a contract basis and have them available more quickly than if we had to build a test track? And probably less expensively.
Well, I'm not sure whether you could do it more quickly. If you look at the schedule, and when we looked at the train schedule, we really need to go out for what I call the core systems, and I'm going to get to that, probably around about 2012, if we have any chance at all to meet the production schedules, in particular of the train sets. When you look at what's going to happen in the rest of the world in the next 10 or 15 years, the amount of people around the world that want train sets like this, it's enormous. The growth is massive. And so we have to get out there and get out, because we're talking maybe 50 to 60 train sets in phase one. And if we don't start getting out by 2012 and so on, then we've got a problem. And they'll need 2 or 3 years to get the trains to the first prototype trains to us in the way we've discussed with the manufacturers. In that timescale, you probably will be able to have the Central Valley test track in place to do the kind of slow running, because Pueblo's got a limit. You know, it's the loop system there, as you've been, I know, and it doesn't reach the kind of speeds ultimately we want. So we could do the slow testing which we need prior to that on our own track, I believe. If we fail on that, then you're correct. There's a possibility of using the Pueblo test track. The Pueblo test track. Just for the initial vehicle.
Thank you.
Let's see. Well, we need the test track, and we need it for many reasons. We have to demonstrate to validify everything we've been doing with the FRA on the rule of particular applicability. We have to ensure that we meet the RAMS requirements. And without that, we're not going to get the rule. We're not going to be able to put those trains anywhere else. The test track itself will have its own utility, whether we do Merced to Bakersfield or Fresno to Bakersfield ultimately, and you'll be able to run trains on that afterwards, and so you'll be able to actually use it. But it will be necessary to complete the whole process, not just the trains. And I'd like to talk about how important that is when I get further down the line. But that test track is a complete railroad. It will include the stations and operations and everything that goes with it. So the federal government and the PUC, we satisfy that we validify the concept of bringing high-speed trains to California before we move them anywhere else, and before we can run them anywhere else. So there we have the test track, and then we need the major maintenance facility. And here's the real trick: the central control that controls all the trains that operate, and they can operate safely, all this positive train control and crash avoidance and all the things that go with it. But because of, and I said earlier, the close proximity of the rod and nod dates and the start of construction, then as we see it, you'd bring in the two, and it flies in, there we go, the two simulation packages, and then the whole process really is up to the authority board as we move forward, because we've been concentrating on getting the rod and nod, and these are early days and early concepts for us for working through the detail of it, having these workshops in the subcommittee so you can input and make the kind of decisions you were talking about, whether we want to do lost time in the way you said, and how can we do it, or does that make sense relative to another section we might want to bring in. That's an important discussion which only the authority board, with the knowledge, as much information we can give you, you can make. This is just an example how you would link it. I've mentioned this enough times, so I think you know what I'm saying. We need everything in place at the rod and nod, and Ken's going to talk about the procurement process. But we also need, in principle, the regulatory approvals of the FRA and the PUC, and we need to do it in this time scale. It's vital when we go to Washington, whoever goes to Washington, we do our best with the FRA to look for ways and means to help support them who are supporting us to get these regulations through. And then we need to get all the railroads to buy in on it, because you can't just do it for the California High-Speed Rail. It has to involve every single railroad that touches us. They have to sign off on it. It's all part of the deal. The right-of-way, I just like that picture because it's not quite the Central Valley, but if you look at the picture, that's what it's going to look like. That's what it's going to look like. And we were using the DGS services as much as we can with Caltrans. We are definitely in the process of identifying parcels and the searches and titles, but we're saying that only after the rod and nod that we can maybe move forward with the real issue of negotiating, which will be with the authority. And we, of course, in the whole of this process, we'll need the environmental permits and other permits to allow us to go forward. Now I'm going to pass to Ken, and he's going to talk about the procurement process. But after that, this is the piece I really want you to look at, which is the core systems.
All right, once the rod and nod are approved and the documents are together, the design is at the proper levels of development, then we're moving into the delivery contracts. How will we go about, what's our approach to actually get packages on the street and award and issue notice to proceed to contractors to get on with building the railroad. Design build and the public-private partnership are the methods that are very well suited to very large and very complex delivery of projects. They're known as an alternative project delivery mechanism as contrasted with the more traditional design, bid, and build. There's reasons for doing this. That's not one of them. The design build concept is that there is a single entity that is responsible for the final design, taking it from 30% out to the final design at whatever level that may be, and for all the construction services combined in a single entity. There is also potential for providing financing as part of that package under the public-private partnership concept. Can also include responsibilities for maintenance and or operation in various combinations. There are several advantages to why, for a complex, huge program, why do design build or PPP, or P3 as we call it. And the first advantage has to do with a single point of responsibility. You have a single point of responsibility. The main benefit there is you have fewer contract interfaces. And anyone that's been involved with trying to coordinate multiple contract interfaces knows that it's inherently fraught with claims, change orders, all kinds of disputes. So if you can eliminate those and contract with a single, capable, responsible entity, you just sidestep a lot of those controversial issues. The other advantage is that you have a team which is integrated between the designer and the builder. That's the concept, design and build. And when you integrate them right up front through the planning stages, through the proposal development, through negotiations, through the design phase, and through the construction phase. So that you truly have an integrated team that brings you a lot of benefits, and I'll mention more about that in a bit. But as an example of one of the benefits is that as the design continues on beyond the 30%, because that's the point at which the design builder team would get the design, one of the advantages is that design progresses. The builder will come up with a subcontracting plan. He can do that early on. The design can be tailored in such a way that it supports that subcontracting plan, and that subcontracting competitive bid process itself can then get a jump start while the rest of the design continues. That's just one example. Design build, and I say design build, but it's the P3 is the financial ingredient that goes with that. But in the design build concept, of course, promotes innovation. Bids start out at 30%, so there's lots of opportunity beyond 30%, provided that the further development of design is in full compliance with the standards and the design criteria that have been provided to that team. Murphy and his set of laws has several things that we're going to try to disprove as we go through this program, but there is a room for innovation in spite of Murphy's Law number 9 that says that there's a lot of disadvantages that go along with any great idea. Obviously, design build, it's very readily apparent that you can get earlier delivery. A lot of people think in terms of early delivery as fast-track construction, and that is part of it. Fast-track construction is you starting construction before the design is complete. That design package is developed just to the point to enable your builder partner to get going. And you tailor that early design to be consistent with what that builder wants to do first. What can he get going on to be more efficient in the long run? Develop the design just to the level that that builder needs it and get on with it. Earlier delivery is also possible because you can package the long lead procurement items right up front. Again, the builder partner says, hey, structural steel is maybe a year out because of world demand. I need to have the structural drawings completed ASAP. So the designer can focus towards that to enable the procurement package to get together. And again, just like the subcontracting packages, you get a jump start on long lead procurement items. That can save months, just that item alone. The early delivery is really a very, very important aspect and benefit that design build brings. It's a win-win for both the state as well as the contractor. As the board has discussed earlier, if you can shave a few months off of a $2 billion contracting package, as an example, if you can save 4 or 5 months off of that by making an earlier delivery, think of the inflation that you've avoided. We're talking about a lot of money. And the contractor, as any contractor who is successful will do, he wants to get in, do the job, and get out at the earliest opportunity, move on, and do work somewhere else, or compete on another package here. But the faster we can complete the work that's done to full compliance and test it out, it's a win-win for everybody. So that's a major advantage of the design-build approach. There's also a potential for lower cost. And by that I mean that the designer, for initial costs, the designer can design the package again in an optimum way that takes advantage of the specific builder's methods and maybe equipment. And he may have some prefabricated forms for concrete work that are already made, and you don't have to build more new ones. Design it around the existing ones, provided it meets the design requirements.
Okay, Mr. Riffey, is there a way that we could zip through these a little bit more?
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Sure will. Okay, there's obviously a life cycle cost where a contractor has maintenance responsibilities, can be designed for efficient maintenance. And with P3, with the private investment, obviously, is potential for lower public financing. Procurement flexibility, meaning you design the procurement package for selection by best value. It's not low price, it's best value overall. And sharing of risk between the parties. Structuring of the contracts, I'm not going to read these. There's lots of considerations that have to go into structuring the contracts. Legal, commercial, technical aspects. Community impacts. I want to pause on this one because this is a very crucial one, to design or to structure the contract packages such that those concerns in the community get factored into the requirements of the design builder to address those requirements, and especially to make sure he has good communication flow with the community, such things as notices about road closures, utility outages, how's he going to manage his traffic, and dust control can be a major item. Also in the structuring of contracts, we have to give careful consideration to labor coordination and the availability of labor. As you saw on Tony's schedules, a lot of work is going to be happening concurrently, a lot of construction work going on concurrently. We cannot just assume that there's adequate labor in each of the necessary trades available concurrently also. Got to do a market survey, got to determine the availability of that, and then open up a dialogue with the unions and over the labor issues to open that up and keep it going and get ideas from them. Packaging, got to make sure we got competition and that we attract the best qualified firms. Bonding is going to be a challenge because of the size of these contract packages. It may or may not be possible for conventional type bonding, but there are other ways to provide performance guarantees like parent company guarantees and letters of credit. Those will be taken into account. Insurance is a major item. Owner-controlled insurance program, which again is a win-win, and we can deal in that in more detail, but it is good for all parties and at a lower cost to the state. So how do we get to the point of initiating these contracts? We would start out with issuing a request for expressions of interest, two-way communication again with the industry. There was an RFEI that was put out in 08 and responded by some 30 firms. This would be another issue of that, but with more detail in what we put out, more development. And the idea is to open that dialogue with the industry about their ideas, their opinions. That would continue on through with a workshop. We would then put out a request for qualifications. This is a qualitative submission by interested parties, no numbers in it. It would deal with their technical approach, the management approach, and the general finance package as an approach without numbers. Once we get the qualification packages in, then there would be a professional team do an evaluation to determine the pre-qualified firms, in which we would narrow the field down to those who could potentially win. If a proposal comes in and there's no potential, they just don't understand the program, they're way off base, they don't have qualified people, in the opinion of the evaluators, then we're doing that proposer entity as well as a state a favor and let them move on to something else. There will be another review by the industry. This program is going to need an awful lot of dialogue between those who have done this kind of work, those who have ideas, draw on that vast array of experience, and work together, engaging the pre-qualified firms to make those documents improved. Following that, we issue the request for proposals, again, to the pre-qualified firms. There would be a pre-proposal meeting, which would be to convey a lot of information to the prospective proposers, answer a lot of questions. It would include site visits, I would expect in most instances. Get the proposals in, again, evaluated by professional panel, selecting a short list of those preferred firms, those that are best qualified to proceed on. Have oral interviews among those that are best qualified, the short list. Then an evaluation process that takes into account the written proposals as well as the oral interviews, and selecting the best value contractor and begin negotiations with that contractor.
Okay. I understand the value and understand the need to have the delivery of contracts in place. But I think it sounds pretty traditional to me. I might be missing some of the nuances, and I appreciate that. But I think what I'd like to do is get through this and move to approach to the staging of work and the next steps.
Two more bullets on this, and then moving on. Make sure the money's in place, come to the board for approval of contract award. Issue notice to proceed. And then I'll turn it back over to Tony.
Thank you very much.
Okay, approach to staging the work. We split it down to the core systems, and I really want to spend time on the core systems so you can, how important I think it is for everyone to grasp it. Talk about the operator and maintenance, talk about the infrastructure elements, and the core system delivery options. I'd like to stop on that to give some examples. And let me say straight away, this is not the only way to skin the cat. This is just the cat, so you can look at it. No more than that. You don't like cats?
You think you have something against cats, and every time you say that, board member Katz, the fur on the back of his head.
I'm not going to win, am I?
And you know, Richard Katz worked very hard to run campaigns against me in the 90s and such, so I always am gleeful when you skin cats and when you hit the cats who are the bumps in the road and all of that. That's I have a good feeling about that. He has less than a good feeling about that. So we should find a neutral ground where you start skinning dogs or coyotes or something.
Okay. Where were we? And the other thing that if you run out of time, I'd like to really show you the integration of the core system with the infrastructure, testing, commissioning, and completion.
So I want to understand in terms of timing. I see here approach to staging, testing, commissioning, and revenue service, management of construction installation, initial section example, then progress today, and the next workshop. What is the timing that you believe you need to make your complete presentation in all of those areas?
From now?
From this point forward?
15 minutes.
No way.
You can do it. Depends if you ask questions, really.
Wow. I will, so let's make a deal that no questions, the questions and answers have to be contained within 15 minutes, and the presentation must be contained within 15 minutes.
Okay.
Go.
All right. So this is the trick. What are the core system elements? And this is critical for this project, and that is there is a view, or there's opposite views, to get the train sets, the train control and signaling, the communications, the central control, which handles the operations and power, the electrification, and we've gone through what that is, with the track ties, ballasting, and all the things that go with it, and the maintenance equipment to do that. The test section that we're talking about needs to have those core system elements, and why? The concept of using a single contract team to do that is important, because the responsibility to make all those things tie together, the things we talked about earlier, Board Member Katz, the difficulty of tying together the PTC with the train sets. What's really important to it is a single point of responsibility to ensure all those pieces match together, relative to the responsibility for actually maintaining and operating the piece. And I want to go back and show you why. If you look at the train, what's important is that this core systems group not only produces the train, but it's a total entity. The catenary system that you have there has to be specific to the train that you're going to build. And what type of train, where the pans are, what the spacing is, what the tensions are, what the connection between the pantograph head and the contact wire is. It looks crude, but it's critical. The second thing is the train itself has to adhere to the TSI requirements for springs, movement, but equally important, the wheel interface between that and the rail. That has to be one holistic piece. And then the control system, the positive train control system that goes to it, and that connections back to the central control room with one contractor responsible for it, that will allow us to have confidence that the whole system will work. There are all sorts of things with the infrastructure, but that's a lot easier. This needs to be a single point of responsibility, and I want to talk about in my 15 minutes some of the things that go with that. So, let's move on. In the same way, the operator and maintenance responsibility, I'm going to move on quite quickly because I think most people have traveled on railroads. But the piece here is, as you look at the core systems, as you look at the opportunities, which I'm coming to in a minute, should we have the operator part of the core systems team? It's the right way if we could, but it's might difficult to put together, but you can have some options with it. I think everybody in sight has seen construction. But I just want to show some beautiful pictures. Look at the Central Valley. Brent, move your head a bit this way. Now, look at that. You know, that's the Central Valley. You talk about the grade crossings. That's a damn good-looking grade crossing for the Central Valley. And that's the kind of thing you can do. Let's see. We talk about aerial structures. We talked about tunnels. There are tunnels. We talked about stations. We talked about the maintenance facilities. And we say, wow, you want a station? Look at that for a station. That's a Chinese station which will blow your eyes out if you saw it. It's gorgeous. It's in, I don't know, it's in China somewhere. Now, but this is the piece I'd like you to look at. No, this is the piece. This is not the only way you would do it. But if you take one of the options, a single core systems contractor team that designs, builds, maintains, operates, and finances it. And they're responsible in the test section for all the core systems. They're responsible because of the way everything needs to be tied together for the whole of the 800 route miles. This is one option, not the only option. And they're responsible for not only the test section operations, but one operator and maintainer for the whole 800 route miles, but have the infrastructure set out and built by other people. In other words, the core systems group where the operator comes along and superimposes itself onto the infrastructure. That's one option. And there are others. You could also look at the test section. Whatever you do, is you need to keep not whatever you do, the track and electrification could be separate, but the core systems group needs to be one contract for the test section. But you could set out the operations maintenance as a separate contract for the whole lot, or you could keep it together just for the test section. And then the outside of the test section, you could give the track and electrification in the other packages with the infrastructure, the sort of thing that you would do in the Lausanne corridor, which was talked about earlier. And then finally, let's put it all on the line, that there would be a single provider of the train set, control, communications, with the responsibility for maintenance. You could operate a separate operator for a franchise in a separate package for the 30, 40 years. But outside the test track, you could do the electrification and track separately. It's only the test track itself you'd want to complete the whole railroad so you could prove it in terms of the FRA.
I see. So you're only 6 minutes into your time. Therefore, this is on our time.
Right.
So you have just given 3 examples, and we'll see them in print, and they'll be up on the website, and each board member will get a copy of this packet.
Right.
But I really do think that this is an important thing for us to try to figure out with your recommendation, but also a decision for an operator. You have given 3 options of how that operator interacts with the rest of the service, right?
Mm-hmm.
From being the same entity or under the control of
one consortium,
the first group, or to this furthest extreme of a separate operations franchise in a whole separate package to how to operate the system,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And therefore, at some point, I would like to extrapolate off of this to really see where decisions would have to be made, mm-hmm. depending upon how we go down that track and how early, for example, an operator could be brought in, or how early could a separate contractor that's providing the electrification services could be brought in or not. And you know, because I think Mr. Katz and his committee will need to look at, you know, where are those decision points, and when we walk past one, then we are setting ourselves up to having it done one way or versus the other. And there's going to be times in which we walk past that separation point, for example. If we want a separate electrification contractor, we need to know here or here. And if we need a separate operations contractor, is there value to bring to talk about operations contractors if we choose to do that in early, even before we pick a train set? I don't know. And I would like to hear from these 3 options, which I very much appreciate, seeing all of these things that really will be added together to create an operating system, what our options are and when we may need to make these decisions along the way. So in some subsequent conversation with the board, that would be good, and I'd like to see that.
And I think personally, I think that's an excellent idea, because it's I hate to say the word, it's the core of the decision-making that I think the board need to make, and it really is critical. Benny?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to comment on this. You know, as Tony was moving ahead with a lot of the tasks he's doing, one of the things that we are considering doing, and we will be bringing it to you for your comment and review and eventual decision, is that we think there's going to be a value to go out there early and bring in some potential operators, potential design-build contractors, potential developers, and some others, and through a pre-qualification process, and to have those entities work with us throughout the process in terms of deciding what the contracts are and how we are eventually going to structure our contracts. And some of those dialogues will take place during that time. But that is something we are planning to bring to you and move forward with it, as well as what you suggest.
You know, Mr. Dearden's made a number of points, and I think this chart just has on the bottom under the 3 bullets all of those 3 areas, and it's just a different combination of the previous 2 options. But I do think that is a vital part of our decision making. I don't think we've kind of put our finger on it yet as to when is the time in which a train set needs to be selected.
Right.
Backing up from that time in which we do that, how long will the establishment of criteria take? How long will an RFP process take? How are those steps? I don't know what that is, and I know we heard some of that from Mr. Riffey possibly as he was talking about contracting and so forth, but I would like to know when those decisions have to be made and then really start backing them out so we start putting them on a matrix for this board to be challenged by that. You know, just from my simple perspective, even though we're building in phase 1 our new intermodal transportation center in Anaheim, and in phase 1 the high-speed rail is not a part, but phase 2, of which high-speed rail is a part, is immediately after that. We know that there's different platform requirements for different train sets. There's different, as you pointed out, electrification requirements. All of those things really have to be made before we can start building anything. And in terms of even a station configuration to address some of that. So there are going to be those points of which I really don't even have any idea when we have to make those decisions. So I would like you to contemplate that and maybe be able to make some of that presentation even at our next board meeting if we could.
We do have that, Mr. Chairman, we have that information available. Such a lot is being covered today, there's a limit. It would be better not to have it, I would ask you not to have it the next board meeting, but maybe the one after.
However you wish to share information with us.
Only a request.
Thank you.
This is the one I wanted to really show you. We talked about earlier how we're bringing the core systems with or without the operator in, and how important that is to put it together by having the infrastructure built, and then you come on top of it as you build the other pieces. So when you get into the civil infrastructure, you build perhaps the civil side of the maintenance facility and the stations, but then you start talking about what comes in and where the core system group begins to operate in terms of finishing off what goes into the maintenance facility, where we're going, bringing in the traction power, the overhead catenary, the track work, the train sets so they've got to roll onto it, tying in the communications to all of it with the central control and the train control system, and make sure all of that works in the test track before you take it anywhere else. And it's a workshop in itself to look at individual pieces like this and see why it is, when it is. And you mentioned early on about the train sets. We've got production targets from 3 major manufacturers which sets times when to give them a chance to build, when we've got to get the specifications ready, when we're going to go out. And a very quick answer on the electrifications, we can tell you now what you need in Anaheim and the Arctic Station on the electrification. So it's part of the detail that's ongoing in what we have. What I really want to say about the testing and commissioning is that everything we've done so far with the technical memorandums...
Excuse me, Mr. Daniels, real quick, on Mr. Dearden's time.
Tony, could I ask you one question about the chart you had before? And that is that right at the bottom, one of the major support points is the stations. Yet we know that we're going to want the cities to build the stations, as is Anaheim building their station. I don't believe environmental work is being done on most of the stations. We're doing environmental work on the track work that's going to go through the stations.
No, we're doing the station. Part of the environmental document is to complete the designs of the stations, Rod. All stations.
No.
And all. Yeah,
well,
Mr.
Mr. Daniels,
basic footprint.
Mr. Dearden, would you allow me to ask a question a little different? Mr. Daniels, when we're doing the environmental work, we do the full environmental impacts that will affect the stations where the high-speed train goes, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Have we, in fact, made a determination that responsibility for construction would be anything but the responsibility of the high-speed rail? The modifications to an existing station or the building of a complementary component, is that the responsibility at this point in time of high-speed rail, or is it coordinated responsibility with the local entity, or what? How do you perceive that?
We perceive the stations as being maybe an independent, the big stations, a contract on its own right, that the cities that have these stations may want to deal with that separately. We'll give them all the standards and what have you, but they will develop. Maybe a developer wants to come along. They may want to pay for the station. The whole development of the stations will be in total conjunction with the stakeholders of that city or town.
So since I knew the answer to this because I spent time with Mr. Daniels on this exact topic yesterday, I mean, the full environmental impact for the Anaheim second phase of our station will be done by the environmental contractors on high-speed rail, and they provide that information to us. They'll work with the city, but in terms of the responsibility to build it, I think each of those decisions will have to be made individually, right?
Correct.
I mean, there may be a time in which we say, no, we want to build it. We'll build it at these specifications, but we need to get money to build it. Versus other options, you might have smaller areas where they're not prepared, to the city or the local transportation agency, to build that portion of the station, and we may have that responsibility, correct?
Right, that's correct. Yeah.
I came across this issue talking with the city of San Jose about 4 weeks ago, where we began to recognize that the High-Speed Rail Authority was doing the environmental clearance on the corridor, the track work down the corridor, that the city was doing an environmental document for the land use around the station, but nobody right now is doing an environmental clearance on what would be the station structure itself, the new station structure.
Rod, I don't think that's correct. We are responsible for the environmental document on that station.
Well, I think, Mr. Deardon, if I could, that is one of the challenges that's being had, because at most major stations there's multiple environmental activities going on. And I have a great assurance from Mr. Daniels that there will be a heightened focus to make sure at each one of these stations where there are multiple environmental issues taking place, environmental clearances, that he will make sure that those sensitivities are addressed.
Correct.
And I feel comfortable that will occur.
That's correct. Where were we? Oh, on the fact that although we've got all the designs and the specifications, they all have to be verified. When it comes to the test section, as I said earlier, and you'll be tired of hearing it, we have to validate that. And there's a real tight progress to enable that to happen. Once that's complete, we can move on, ultimately, to those standards and validate each of the other sections as we bring them in. For us, we don't have a railroad. So whether we bring an operator in early, which I think is a good idea, we have to develop the rules and regulations of our railroad. What is our railroad? What rules and regulations do we need? And those rules and regulations have to be approved by all the other railroads being adjacent and working with us, and at the same time with the FRA and the PUC. So it's not a lightweight task, and we and the PM team have reorganized this year to ensure that we're bringing people in to do just that. This is Motherhood and Apple Pie. You can read it. Obviously, you need key people. I'm going to move on to my 6 minutes, and everybody's going to be involved with it. What is equally important, though, in this staging is all the work that goes into the emergency testing, not just the railroads, but the fire life safety of all the authorities and all the cities and towns that we're moving through. That's a big piece of the cake, and will be a heavy, important piece of the cake as we start the process, not only of finishing the design, but going forward through the construction and all the work that goes with it. Trial running will start, obviously, at the lower speeds, and it'll culminate, I can't say it, culminates in an operational safety case for agency approval, the validation of the whole line. I don't think I want to go through this. There's not a person in this room who doesn't know about management and construction installation. And to save my time, you can look at that. Ken's right up the point about community relations, the interface management, and all the things that go with it. And I'm getting close, but as a project staging example of the way we perhaps would do it, including electrification, train control, and communications, which you talked about earlier, we have taken a shot at looking how we would break this down, how we would start it. The basic plan, of course, is to get the utilities out of the way. We know where we can work with in this section. We know where the BN and OCTA right-of-way is and what's got to be in and out. We know where the utility owners are. We understand the process of some of the challenges, in particular in the high-tension lines. And we really can't start that again until after the process of the rod and nod. We've had a look currently, and this has been done recently, of course, because we need to do it for the stimulus program. We've itemized where all the high-tension power lines are located. We've looked at the grade separations. We know where they are, whether they're both new and modified. We've itemized them, what the work includes. We've tied down the approach that they want to be complete before we do the grading and earthworks, by and large, so we're not in a position to do things which are not required. We know where we're starting to look at what we're doing with the grading and earthworks, that what we're not going to do at this stage before you go in to the structures. We're cognizant of the fact that we need to define the packages. If possible, we're doing the municipal and county boundaries. It simplifies the coordination and compliance of the work, and we've looked at that and are parceling it accordingly. We broke out the aerial viaducts, the structures, as 9.1 miles of it, and we've broken down into the bigger pieces and the shorter pieces and how we would handle it. And you can see that on the map. We've talked about how we're going to build the track work separately. This piece would not be with the core systems designer, because once that's been cleared and the design's been cleared and tested, then track and electrification, frankly, can be given to different contractors, not necessarily the core system contractor. And we've set out how we would do that as an example. It's not the only way. And we then moved on to look at the stations and what we've said with the stations. Each one is an independent package. How do we look at that? How do we deal with that? And we've talked about that quickly a few minutes ago. We've taken everything I've just said and broken it down into stages, in distances, what's there, where the utilities are, where the grade crossings there, what are we doing as it relates to a possible tunnel alternative which we're looking at, and the location of it. The challenges for us is the size and number of contracts. Clearly, the smaller the works, up to 50 million or less, it needs much more coordination. The big boys want the heavier price, and maybe we should do that. We've met with the heavy hitters in the construction industry, the Kiewits, the Flatirons, the Granites, the Floors. We've asked them for their appetite, how big they want to take the piece of cake, and it ranges from maybe 300 million up to 2 billion plus. And so we are getting a handle on what's out there and whether or not we can do that, and how we do that, and how we look at it as it relates to the resource we have in California and the timescale for building it. And other than that, I made it. Kent.
Very good. Very good. 15 minutes. You said no questions. Oh, 15 minutes of questions. Sorry.
Maybe not. Are there any questions for Mr. Daniels in the ballot? Don't see that. Thank you. I'm not going to applaud you. I mean, good heavens, but you did a good job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Mr. Kopp.
Repeat again, how and in what form the material will be delivered to board members?
I believe the full presentation that has been on the screens will be available on the website, as well as emailed to every board member who has an accessible email by which they can access. Otherwise, there'll be a hard copy that people can pick up at the high-speed rail office, or it can be mailed to them. This has been videotaped, and it will be available on our website in that fashion as well for those who wish to hear the speed by which Mr. Daniels can truly make a presentation. There are questions that were asked, and those specific answers will be provided in writing to the members of the commission and also available in the same fashion on the website. Thank you. Mr. Riffey, you'd like to conclude?
I am not going to summarize what we did today, but I hope it accomplished the objectives of the board in getting everybody up to speed with where we are and the big chunks of work that are laid out in front of us. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. Morshed.
Well, before we do that, and Mr. Morshed talks about the next workshop, there's one bit of information I would like, and I want to reiterate it to you, and it may take a little work, but right now you had that graph that was very good in terms of the overall timeline for each of those segments. But I would like that more clearly defined as to which operators are operating there, and somewhere that we can see how much money was expended in each of those segments on engineering and design work up till now, what it'll cost to complete it, and for what I believe that many folks and even some critics of high-speed rail don't know what's been happening. Therefore, if they can't really see and touch the level of investment that's been made and the great degree of work that's been made, they kind of miss the fact that we have been really moving towards great progress. So I want something, particularly when I go meet with legislators and other interested parties, I want to be able to hand them something and say, as of this date, August 15th, look at this segment, and these are folks working here, doing this, and the level of accomplishment in each of those areas and the level of investment we have made. And I would like it updated monthly. We're expending money monthly. It's not a hard deal. It's like you change $1 line on a regular, and whatever systems we need, maybe Carrie, you can assist in developing a system by which it's easily accessible on our web, on a variety of places, so that people really do see the level of progress being made, because I think we haven't done a very good job in sharing really the level of progress that's being made across the state. People see it in segment by segment, but maybe not the whole picture. And I want to be able to have it on a piece of paper and a matrix to share with the legislative leadership and those within the administration and beyond. Thank you. Any other comments of board members before Mehdi wraps us up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Mr. Dearden?
Well, would it be too much to ask? I'm a Luddite, and I'm not going to change. Would it be too much to ask that you run a color copy of this presentation for each one of the board members and mail it to us?
All right. You can withhold sending that to me. I will save the authority money and print it off on my own color copier if I need that. But those board members who ask for that, let's make sure we provide whatever information. Mr. Kopp, are you one of those that would define your... Yeah, but this is... All right, Mr. Kopp.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, Mr. Morshed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just want to note that Jeff has been taking copious notes, especially on the latest request for the kinds of documents and information you want, and he will be happy to make sure that's produced and provided to you. Secondly, in the purpose of the workshop, as I said earlier, was to kind of give you a good feeling in terms of feel about what the activities relating to the final construction of high-speed rail and operation of high-speed rail entails. And you heard a great deal today about that process. But every one of those was, as I said earlier, totally independent of availability of money. But the fact of the matter is, money is the one that's going to actually drive the schedule, not how we wish it, but it is when do we have money to go to construction. That's when it's going to be important. And next workshop we will talk about financing. The second thing is, I keep repeating, but it's important to repeat it, that we need to develop a 5-year program in terms of the investment. We need to establish some priority. We need to include those priorities. What time do we start environmental work? Why do we start environmental work? And why are we going from that to right away? And when we go into construction. So far, we've been kind of approaching it on a all-inclusive process of doing environmental work for the entire system. Including the Sacramento working between Sacramento to Merced and other pieces that are not part of the Phase 1. There has been some criticism as to why we are spending money on those when we don't have any money for construction, and is it too late or too early? Those issues need to be addressed. Eventually, we need to establish priority that if you're investing or spending public money for a corridor or corridors, that there is a purpose attached to it and there is a benefit at the end, and those are going to be the process that this programming hopefully will bring about. But I think this was good. Then finally, I would like to ask you individually if you would share with me privately your comment and reaction to today's, so we can try to improve the next one to be better if it needs to be, or if it's perfect, then we won't touch it. Thank you.
All right, it hasn't been perfect. But I do, in fact, want to thank you, Mr. Morshed, for really ensuring that we did get the full overview necessary, I think, to challenge us and to see the level of task we have before us. And Mr. Riffey and Mr. Daniels, you did a very good job in presenting a lot of information that's challenging in a very succinct and proper way. So thank you very much for allowing us to see this. I want to thank Assemblymember Galgiani for your time here. That's very nice. And thank my colleagues. You know, this is the majority of the board stayed through this entire presentation. I think it demonstrates our renewed commitment on getting down to business, and how difficult this task is before us. I think we're prepared to address it. And also, I want to thank you all for the patience that you have in me to get to where we are, because I want to make sure that we hear the full breadth of the discussion on finance options, on how to bring money forward and to ensure we're using every tool available. And I've asked Mr. Morshed to contact many people who have unique, different ideas to address that, because I don't think, as we're looking to build a state-of-the-art system, we can necessarily look at solely traditional methods to finance it. If any of the board members have suggestions as to areas they would like to hear about in terms of the financial opportunities there to fund a portion of the project, I think share those with Mr. Morshed so that we can ensure do what we can to hear all points of view instead of some of the limited points of view we've had up to this point. We want to hear everything and to be able to contemplate where we need to go next. If there's no other business to come before the authority, we stand adjourned until September 3rd.
Well done. Well done. See you on Monday, right?
I have to give you a tea break.
You can